Whoa. Okay. That wasn't my intention. I accidentally pushed the button and started the live early. I've never done that before. But there you go. I can't exactly take it back now, can I? So here I am, like 5, 6, 7 minutes early, starting this live. Well, there you go. Wow. The wonders of modern technology and new iPhones. Boy, 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 boy. Welcome, folks who are already here. And I'm sure as the time that this live was actually scheduled for comes around, more folks will be piling in, and that's good. What's new, folks? Those of you who are with us, welcome, welcome, welcome. In fact, since you're early birds, why don't I give you all a shout out, right? I'll call you out as I see you before we get going. We'll do another one later, but since we're getting going early, who's here? I see Darth Buddha. I see Iron Candy. I see Yeah Emily. I see Paz del Mundo. I see Kevin Q. I see Lawrence Chu in Albany, New York. I see Sommer in the UK. I see Ahoy from East Germany, Atatis. CL says, I'm glad this is happening. Lumitopia is on the stream. Rick Fry is here. Constructive Socialist Gang says Arthur Porter. Tony Garia from Ontario, Canada. Pirate Alex. T-Mac from Ireland. Dylan Smile. Dust James. Kevin Q. Can you give a big shout out? Hey everyone, says Heidi Edelweiss. Zuba from Scotland. Zuba from Scotland is here. Hello from USA says yay Emily. Fresh Flowers says hello Caleb. Well, hello to all of you. Sebastian says wadap. Joanne from Amsterdam in the Netherlands. Caleb, shout out from Culver City. Cecilia says, power just went out in my apartment. Well, thanks for staying with us despite your situations. Norman Keenan from Denmark is Irish. It's tanky time in New Zealand. Hello from Atlanta, says Oh Mad Dump. Wow, folks, wow. Wow, I didn't intend to start early, but I'm starting early. So there we go. I'm sure more folks will come as we go on. I've got quite a bit to talk about tonight. Sierra says hi, says Arthur Porter. Well, hi to you, Sierra, as well. Arthur and Sierra are great folks. Met them when I was out in Los Angeles, and they drove quite a way to come see me in Los Angeles. They're not a Los Angeles bunch. They're out in Phoenix, so there you go. Oh, boy. Kevin Q says, can you talk about the People's Republic of Bulgaria? Clarence Darrow is so excited to watch us tonight. What does tanky mean? Says work hard now. Interesting stuff. I can fit that tanky question in with something I'm talking about later. So that actually works. So I'll fit that in. But yes, we're rolling around. We're rolling around to the time we were supposed to start. So as we clean house here, welcome everyone. Welcome to our Saturday night conversation. Tommy Faras is from sunny San Diego. UK Royal Families says Sami Jobber. Hello from Turkey. Shout out from Los Angeles says Ramiro. Capitalism in Crisis says Bob Marston. There's someone revving up a car engine or something in my neighborhood. I'm hearing this loud sound. It's rather obnoxious, honestly. But there you go. I hope folks can't hear it, but I'm by my window and someone is just revving up their car engine like you wouldn't believe. So there you go. What a sound. Well, there you go. It seems to be over now. The chaos of New York City. I'm just looking out my window to see what in the world that sound is. Grinding metal or something. I mean, it sounds like a car backfiring. It's like a gurm and then boom. So it sounds like someone trying to start a defective engine or something. Yeah, wow, crazy times. But you hear all kinds of there it goes again. There it goes again. Oh, but it stopped. I hope it stops. Oh, there it goes again. Wow, crazy times, right? That is one loud sound. You know, they have like sound ordinances in this city. You can't really do this kind of thing. It's not really tolerated. We shall see what happens. We shall see what happens. Norman Keenan says, hee hee. Hugo Diaz said, what are my thoughts on left-wing anarchism or anarchism? Ha ha ha. Yeah, there you go. Well, folks, as we're rolling into things, please tweet this out. Please share this on social media. Make it a bigger conversation. The more the merrier. Please post on your Facebook. Oh my God, what did Caleb just say? Join the conversation. Bring all your friends and family. Make this a bigger discussion. I don't care if your friends and family are communists or socialists. Everyone's welcome here. However, for those in the chat, I'm just going to give a general announcement. If you see somebody trolling and saying things that are clearly intended to offend other people, just ignore them. Just ignore them. Just ignore them. Just ignore them. Let me repeat this. Just ignore them. Don't feed the trolls, right? This is a game people play. They jump into my lives and say silly things. So if you see them doing that, best to just pretend they're not there and keep talking about whatever it is we are talking about as we go on with our conversation. Don't feed the trolls. Don't feed the trolls, as they said. What more? Folks, I love super chats. Super chats are awesome. I appreciate them. So if you ask me a super chat, I will make a point of answering it. If it's not, if it's something completely off the wall and outrageous, I won't answer it. But I may not be able to interrupt. So I have here a notepad. And I will write it down. Like I just got a super chat there from Tommy Farras. He's asking me about the weaponization of IDPol against Iran. So what am I doing? I'm writing it down. I thank you, Tommy Farras, for the for the super chat. And I'm writing it down on my notepad. And you will have your question answered. That's the way we roll. That's the way we roll here. I might be in the middle of something at the time, so I won't necessarily immediately stop. But if you do shoot me a super chat, you will get your question answered. So don't have any fear of that. I have my handy-dandy notebook right here, and I will answer super chats. So there you go. Thank you, Tommy. Folks, this is from today's Wall Street Journal. It's actually today and tomorrow's Wall Street Journal, the weekend edition. I'm going to read it to you. Not the whole thing, but just a couple highlights. The headline is, Oil declines as supply outweighs Iran tensions. Oil prices finished their largest weekly drop in 6 months, Friday, despite the recent heightened tension between the U.S. and Iran. This week's moves were also another reminder of the globe's plentiful supplies, in part because of the rise of U.S. shale production. Despite Mr. Trump's claim that the U.S. does not need crude oil from the Middle East, analysts caution that the Strait of Hormuz remains a vital choke point for oil markets. Even as the world's largest producer, the U.S. still imports sizable amounts of oil, and the Organization for the Petroleum Exporting Countries and its allies as the main source that can be quickly turned on in an emergency. Inventories in other developed nations have also remained well supplied, according to the International Atomic Energy Agency. I'm writing down the other super chat. So, folks, what I just read to you might sound like some dull discourse, dull stuff from the financial pages. But folks, and I thank you for those super chats that just came in. They've both been written down. Folks, what you need to remember about what I just read, this is why it is vitally important, okay? If you don't recall, last week at this time, we were possibly on the brink of World War III. U.S. President Donald Trump assassinated the top general and celebrity in the Islamic Republic of Iran. And the USA and Iran were on the brink of all-out war. And everyone was very, very nervous about what the next move would be. So we were in this really, really, really heightened tension situation. The world was on the brink of war, and as I just read you, the oil price went up for 2 seconds. Like 2 seconds. You can bring the world to the brink of World War III. You can have the entire world absolutely on edge, and the oil price still will not go up. Why? And thank you, Herb. I appreciate that from Tampa, Florida. You can bring the world to the brink of a third world war, and the oil price will still not go up. Why, dare you ask? Because there is too much oil. This is the situation that we are in. The oil prices continue to drop, and Donald Trump and the U.S. administration are dramatically trying their hardest to keep those prices up. And why are they doing this? Because of the fracking bubble. Do folks know about the fracking bubble? There are these folks called the fracking companies. They extract shale gas from the shale with boiling water, extract gas and oil from the shale below the ground of the United States. And those folks are fracking on credit. They're borrowing money in order to continue extracting oil in that manner. It's because of them that the USA now has the largest oil production of any country in the world because of hydraulic fracking. We are no longer dependent on foreign oil. In fact, we are oil exporters rather than oil importers. The 1973 oil export ban in the United States has been lifted, right? We are exporting gas and oil as well as importing it. And because there is this huge new supply of oil and natural gas coming from the ground beneath our feet, from the soil, from the shale, because of that, the price of oil has significantly decreased. Supply and demand, folks. The more oil there is, the less oil costs. The less oil there is, the more oil costs. And the price of oil continues to drop. And the fracking companies, Noble Energy, there's a number of them. The Koch brothers are involved heavily in fracking. They keep losing money because the oil price goes down. And furthermore, right now, the oil price is about $60 a barrel, and they still can't pay back their loans. It's not profitable. Fracking is not very profitable. The rate of profit, deep sea drilling is very profitable, right? Getting oil out of the desert in Saudi Arabia is very profitable, but it's highly expensive to frack, and the payout isn't as good. It's quite an expensive process. These fracking companies are all drilling with loans from Wall Street. They have borrowed money from Wall Street in order to continue fracking, not drilling, but fracking. And they are not paying back their loans. And Wall Street doesn't want to keep lending money to these guys, these fracking cowboys, as they are referred to, doesn't want to lend them money. And why does it not want to lend them money? Because they're not having difficulty paying it back. And if the oil price continues to drop, if the oil price does what it did under Obama, if it does what it did under Barack Obama, and it goes to what it was, do you remember when it was like $27 a barrel of oil under Obama? If the oil price drops that low, there's going to be a crash on Wall Street because these guys have borrowed so much money, and if they don't pay it back, there's going to be a problem. And you would think, no diet beverage at this point, too late at night, got to sleep. Thanks, Sebastian. You would think that bringing the world to the brink of a war with Iran, a war between the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran, with Russia and China heavily involved and all of that, you would think that escalating international tensions that much, where you kill the top Iranian general, you would think that would cause the oil prices to shoot up for a week or two. But no, it caused the oil prices to shoot up for a day, right? The next day, Friday, after the killing on Thursday, yeah, the oil prices were up about 4%. And now they're back to the low place they were before. This is very, very problematic. We live in an oil-centered global economic order. Airplanes fly with gas made from oil. Cars drive with gas made from oil, right? All the plastic in the world has oil in it. We are in an oil-based global economic order. Now, China is desperately trying to change that. China is funding alternative energy, doing everything it can. It sees this as a weakness. It's trying to get out of this trap of the oil-based economic system. But that's how the world is ruled. The people who rule the world are oil bankers, the richest of the rich, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the DuPonts, the Morgans, the Rothschilds. They have their wealth because they control oil. Oil is banking. All the huge banks are oil banks. And I go over this all in my book, Oil and the Global Capitalist Crisis. This is the text of a presentation I gave in Brazil to thousands of labor workers, workers from labor unions in Brazil, the Trade Union Center of Brazil. They had me speak in 2016, and I gave this presentation on oil prices and how they are manipulated. It's available online, numerous places. And this is the book, and it's a short book. I mean, it's not a huge text, but in this book, I talk about how this works, right? That British Petroleum, BP, is basically tied in with HSBC Bank, about how Chase Bank is basically ExxonMobil, which is the inheritor of Standard Oil of the Rockefellers, and that the international global elite that runs the United States is basically the four super majors, the four super major oil companies: Chevron, BP, Royal Dutch Shell, and ExxonMobil. Those four corporations, you add them together with Total, which is the French super oil corporation, and together you've got roughly 85% of the world's oil production. These are super international monopolies, and they are involved in the oil trade and controlling the oil markets, but they're also heavily involved in banking. And this is the ruling elite of the world, and this is the World Trade Organization, and this is the International Monetary Fund. This is the Bretton Woods global financial system. And that's who it is. And keeping the world on oil keeps this clique of British bankers, American bankers in power, keeps them running the world. And that's the situation that we are in. And as you saw, the world just was on the brink of having a war with the Islamic Republic of Iran. Right? And why do we have an issue with Iran? Why can't Iran be a quote-unquote normal country, right? That's what Mike Pompeo said. We just want Iran to be a normal country. Why is Iran not a normal country, according to Western capitalism? Because in 1979, Iran had a revolution, and it seized control of its oil. It centered the economy around the state, and it's been using its oil to fund a state-run economy, and the proceeds from selling oil on the international markets go to build up the Iranian economy, not to line the pockets of ExxonMobil and Rockefeller and Carnegie and DuPont. And furthermore, let me add, Iran is a competitor. Every barrel of oil that Iran sells is a barrel of oil someone didn't buy from BP or Chevron or ExxonMobil. The same for natural gas. Why does the USA hate Russia, for example? Well, Russia used to be, until the fracking explosion, Russia used to be the top oil and gas producing country. Now the United States is. And every barrel of oil, every ounce of liquefied natural gas that anyone buys from Russia is an ounce of liquefied natural gas or a barrel of oil they did not buy from Wall Street or London. This is the reality of Western capitalism. And throughout the 20th century, we saw many countries rise up and seize control of their natural resources. The Ba'athist movements of the Middle East, Iraq, Syria, right? We saw the Venezuela, that began in the 20th century, or the 21st century, but, we saw many uprisings, Libya, where the population seized control of its oil resources and began moving toward a petro-socialist model of development, where state-controlled oil resources funded the development of a state-run economy. And that's what Libya had. That's what Venezuela has. That's what Iran has. And it was this that laid the basis in many areas for an alternative to Western capitalism. It's about controlling the oil markets. And right now, China realizes that its weakness as a country economically is the fact that it doesn't have very much oil and gas. It has to import its oil and gas from countries like Russia, from countries like Saudi Arabia, from the United States. And they realize that's a weakness. So China is working very, very, very hard to develop alternatives, big alternatives, and try to break the world out of the oil market trap, right? China is funding research into fusion energy. And really, even though a lot of the anti-imperialist countries are oil-centered, they're working hard on this. Russian President Vladimir Putin has called for international cooperation to develop fusion energy. The only way that countries around the world can really break free from international Western capitalism dominated by Western countries, is if the state of China or other anti-imperialist countries is able to make technological breakthroughs, if we can get to a higher mode of production, if we can get to a higher fuel source, right? Making the world switch to windmills and solar panels is not going to do it. Getting out of the oil-based financial order can only be done with progress, with historical progress, with a higher mode of production being developed. And in Iran is one of the main backers of fusion energy. I interviewed years back a fusion energy researcher, a physicist in New Jersey, who talked about how it was very difficult because the sanctions on Iran had blocked him at one point from doing any fusion energy research with Iran. And Iran has poured a huge amount of its government budget into fusion energy research. And Iran is an oil-based country, but they realize that being in that oil trap is what is weakening them as a country. They want to not be part of that oil trap, right? This is what you have to understand. This is what you have to understand. And if you can come to understand that the oil-based economic order, as I talk about in my text, Oil and the Global Capitalist Crisis, is holding back humanity, then you can understand what's going on. Now, I want to talk about some other things, but I think when it comes to the situation with Iran, because, people saw last week on here, I was quite worked up about the situation with Iran. What happened? All right, so Qasem Soleimani was killed, and Iran responded. And people didn't know what Iran's response was going to be, but Tuesday, a number of missiles were fired at U.S. bases. And the U.S. media has basically tried to play it off as, see, Iran couldn't do anything. See, there's no response from Iran. They can't do anything to us. But you'll notice, after those U.S. bases were hit, Trump did not come out and give a statement immediately. You'll notice that Trump gave a statement the next morning. You'll notice that he was half hour late in giving the statement. You'll notice that he came out looking terrified. Look at that clip of Trump. And he spoke for only 11 minutes. He slurred his words. He said, tolerated. I believe it's tolerated, Mr. Trump. He looked scared. And instead of talking about how he was not going to allow Iran to attack the United States and he was going to go get them, he just said, we're going to put more sanctions on. He talked about cooperating with Iran against ISIS. He gave a rant against Barack Obama and the nuclear deal. And he walked away after 11 minutes. What was going on there? Now, U.S. media would have you believe, oh, that's because Iran can't do anything. Did folks realize, take a look, what happened? Now, there were no U.S. casualties, right? But what did happen? The USA was unable to stop those missiles from hitting their targets. They were unable to intercept them. These missiles that Iran has been testing, every time they test their missile system, there's outrage from the United States. How dare they have missiles to deter an attack on them? Every time they test their missile system, there's outrage in American media. Those missiles work. They work. Iran not only is capable of hitting the targets it intends, making very precise strikes with its missiles, but furthermore, Iranian missiles are incapable of being deflected by the United States. The USA did not have the power to stop those missiles from hitting its bases. And if Iran can hit with precision U.S. bases in Iraq, it can do what it has said it would do many times. Long before this particular crisis broke out, Iran has said that if they were attacked, they would rain missiles on Israel. And if they were attacked, they would rain missiles on Riyadh and on Saudi Arabia. And basically, by attacking those bases, it wasn't a secret they were going to do it. The USA was prepared for it. They practically announced they were going to do it ahead of time. But even then, the USA was not able to deflect those missiles. And essentially, Iran proved that it is capable of successfully carrying out its threat against Israel, its threat against Saudi Arabia. Iran is capable of delivering a lot more damage. And Israel's got this big Iron Dome. The USA is supposed to have all these sophisticated fighter jet planes and all this. They could not deflect those strikes. They could not intercept those missiles. They hit their target. Iran said, we are going to hit here. They hit there, and the USA wasn't able to stop them. That's big. That's very, very big. So now we have a situation where in Iraq, the Iraqi government has ordered the United States to leave, and the United States isn't leaving. So the United States' presence in Iraq is illegal, which it has been all along, but now it's pretty blatantly illegal. This is a very interesting situation. We should all be paying very, very close attention to this. Paying very, very close attention to this. Folks, the world is in a state of change. There are two economies in the world today. There is the economy of global capitalism centered around Wall Street and London, ruling the world by keeping the world poor so that they can stay rich. And there is the alternative, the Eurasian alternative, centered around Russia and China. But you've got Iran, you've got Venezuela, you've got Cuba, you've got North Korea, you've got Zimbabwe, you've got many different countries that are part of this alternative global system that has developed, which is based on win-win cooperation, where countries become richer by making other countries richer. It's a different model of global trade. And it's because these economies tend to be centered around the state. And instead of being centered around the chaos of the market, they are centered around state central planners, right? When the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank, the IMF trade with a country, they require it to gut its state sector. right? They go there and they say, you got to cut the government budget. And to get more loan money, you got to cut more government workers. You got to lay people off. You got to get rid of labor protections. You got to get rid of any protections for local businesses. You just have to open up and let your country get looted if you want to get those development loans. And we saw that, and that happened all over Eastern Europe in the 90s. It happened all over Latin America in the 90s as well. This model, this neoliberalism model, where you go in and you just demand that the countries just be looted, and they get your loan, and then to get their next loan, they have to get looted more, and it's a mess, right? But the way China trades with countries, the way Russia trades with countries, is they go to countries, and instead of demanding that they privatize everything, they actually loan money to the government sector. And they go to the government and they say, wow, hey, you ought to have a government-run rail system to connect parts of your country, and they do it. They say, you ought to have, an airport here, and they do it. They say, you ought to have a hospital here, and they do it, right? They set up joint ventures with state-run oil companies, with state-run mining corporations, and expand them. And Chinese corporations and investors get rich, and the local economy of the country flourishes. And it's win-win cooperation. The country gets wealthier, and Russia and China get wealthier. The Eurasian Economic Union, the One Belt, One Road Initiative are completely opposite economic models. They function in the opposite way, right? Instead of going to the countries, looting them, and driving them into poverty, they go to countries, build them up, make them wealthier, build up the domestic economy, make money from doing that, and help the country make more money. It's a different model. It is a completely different model. And Western capitalism would like you to believe, if you read anything coming out of the World Bank and the IMF, they make it sound like they'd learned their lesson from the 90s. Oh, we were too neoliberal, they say. We were too neoliberal. But they still have the same policies overall. There might be an exception here and there, but they overall have the same policies. Why? Because China's long-term interest is in countries all over the world that are now poor getting wealthier. And the long-term interest of Wall Street and Western capitalism is keeping countries poor. They don't make any money. If people start buying oil from Venezuela or buying oil from Iran or buying oil from Russia, Western capitalism loses money. There's nothing in it for them. If they help these countries industrialize, if they help build them up and make them stronger, that leads to a situation where Wall Street and London don't have a monopoly. They don't have domination on the global markets. They don't control international trade, and they will lose their power. Meanwhile, when Russia and China trade with a country and it gets wealthier, then they get wealthier. They have someone new to trade with. These are different economic models. Western capitalism rules by controlling vital resources, namely oil, and controlling trade routes, right? During the Roman Empire, there was a saying that all roads lead to Rome. And this was actually a law that the Romans imposed on the people that they conquered. If you were in a part of the Roman Empire, if you were in Tunisia, which was part of the Roman Empire, if you were in Britain, which was part of the Roman Empire, if you were in Gaul, which is what they called France, and you were part of the Roman Empire, and you wanted to build a road to connect to another part of the Roman Empire, you were not allowed to do it. The only roads connecting different, regions and areas were roads the Romans built themselves for extracting slaves and goods and taking them to Rome. There was no empire-to-empire trade. That was not permitted. Rome was the only entity that you could trade with, and that's how it maintained its domination, by controlling the trade routes, right? No one got anything except through Rome. There were no roads except for roads that led to Rome. Now, Julius Caesar wanted to change that. Julius Caesar had a vision of building up the cities of various places as making them into like trading hubs. He disagreed with that. He was pushing something closer to the One Belt One Road initiative. He wanted to build up Alexandria and build up Athens and build up various cities throughout the empire and make them into hubs that would be connected, expand the citizenship to Roman citizenship to peoples in those cities. Julius Caesar was stabbed to death by the Roman Senate. They weren't going to have it, right? All roads lead to Rome. That's how imperialism operates. Wall Street and London, ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, Chevron, Rockefeller, Carnegie, DuPont, Carnegie, Rothschild, Mellon, they rule the world by controlling the trade routes, by saying all roads lead to Rome. That's how they rule. Imperialism is not a policy. Imperialism is a system. It is a global order in which Western bankers rule the world. It is monopolies, international cartels, carving out spheres of influence and controlling them in order to rule the world. That is the nature of imperialism. Imperialism is a system. It is capitalism in its global monopoly stage. Right? This is, people think imperialism is a verb. People think imperialism is when one country attacks another or has influence over another country. No, imperialism is an economic order in which banking dominates over industry, in which huge monopolies exist and dominate national markets and then begin expanding and beating down the national markets of other countries. Lenin wrote a very, very good book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, explaining this order, this international order called imperialism and how it functions, right? The export of capital and how the bankers and billionaires in the Western countries do not simply make profits, but they make super profits because they are not merely exploiting the working people of their homeland. They are exploiting working people all over the world. And the people in the colonized world, in places like South America and Africa and Asia, Latin America, they not only are they exploited, but they are super exploited because their entire nation is kept in a state of chronic poverty and underdevelopment so that super profits can be made by the imperialists. This is the understanding of imperialism. And this comes from Lenin's groundbreaking book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. But, let me add, this was the understanding that went far beyond just the communist movement. This was the understanding that Ba'athist Arab socialism had of imperialism. This was this understanding of imperialism that, that was just widespread. African socialists had it. The Islamic Republic of Iran, they talk about it, and they studied Lenin. And even though it's an Islamic, country, this understanding of the economics of imperialism is something that is widely studied in the Iranian Islamic university system, even though they are not Marxists and reject Marxism. They understand Lenin's theory of imperialism. It's central in their understanding, right? Wherever you go, anti-imperialist forces understand this. They are not up against a policy. They are up against a system. They're up against a system where Western capitalists make super profits, keeping the world poor. That's what imperialism is. And that understanding is largely absent, I think, from leftist circles. People need to understand the nature of imperialism. Imperialism is a global financial order that keeps the world poor so Wall Street can stay rich. That's what imperialism is, folks. So I see a lot more of you have joined us. Welcome, welcome, welcome. But please, let's make this a bigger conversation. Tweet this out. Please, spread the word. Let's bring more people on board. Make this a bigger conversation. The more, the merrier. So now I am going to address those super chats. All right? So Tommy Faras, he asked me about the weaponization of IDPol against the Islamic Republic of Iran. Well, it's very interesting, right? Imperialism has had a little bit of a makeover, right? In the age of colonialism, most specifically, the imperialists often conquered people under the notion that they were bringing them conservatism. Bet you didn't know that, right? But yes, when the Spanish were colonizing the Native Americans in, Central America and elsewhere. They told them, oh my goodness, you are naked, you are not Christian, you have homosexuality. We're going to come there and teach you how to be good Roman Catholic Christians. When Africa was being colonized, when Hawaii was being colonized, it was being colonized by forces that claimed they were bringing conservatism. They were teaching these uncivilized people who don't have Western ways of life, and they were bringing them the Western way. But now it's the opposite. Now the imperialists accuse the people that they are colonizing and oppressing of not being liberal enough, right? No matter what country it is, it's oppressing women, and we're going there to supposedly free the women. No matter what country it is, we're going there to free the homosexuals. No matter what country it is, we're going there to teach them not to be racist. This is how imperialism frames itself. The imperialists no longer portray themselves as bringing Western Christian stability and social order. That Victorian narrative has been repudiated. Now we're bringing Western values of tolerance and compassion and internationalism and anti-racism. And this is because imperialism has basically had a makeover. It's a PR change. At the end of the day, it's not about liberalism or conservatism. It's about profits. That's what it's about. And the hypocrisy of their claims are very easy to dissect, right? You're talking about identity politics, right? Is Iran, being attacked by the United States because it oppresses women? Well, look at Saudi Arabia, where they just allowed women to drive cars. And the women, mind you, in Saudi Arabia, the women who advocated women being able to drive cars, some of them are now on death row and facing execution by public beheading. Even though they changed the law, the women were being disruptive. They were causing problems by protesting for that. Right? And there's many examples of the hypocrisy. In Iran, you have women that are brigadier generals in the army, right? In Iran, you have a very, very large percentage of the elected parliament that is women, far more, I should add, far more than in the United States, far more women in elected office. In Iran, I've seen it, billboards where they have women in headscarves with guns, women's empowerment, women's militias. There are things in Iran that are not correct when it comes to women, and I'm not going to get into that, but I'm sure it's all over the internet and you can see that, and I'm not here to endorse that or defend that or say that's the right way to do things. I'm not a Muslim, but I'm just telling you that it's a little more complicated than they make it out to be, right? I mean, I know the Ayatollah in Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, has said that denying women the ability to get an education is a violation of Islam and is not true, and that in Iran's government-run universities, there are more women than men. So it's complicated. It's more complicated than you think. And I've been to Iran a number of times. Every time I went there, I realized that I had thought something, and I thought something before I went that I was completely wrong about. I would go once, I'd think, okay, now I understand Iran. And then I would go back and go, wow, I was wrong about that. And then I would go back and I would say, wow, I was wrong about that. And then I would go back and say, wow, I was wrong about that. It's never as simple as we think, right? We know that there are issues with women's rights in the United States, right? Look at Me Too and sexual assault and all of that that's gone on. We know that many countries struggle with domestic violence, with rape, with sexual assault. Every country faces these issues, right? But the notion that the United States is going after Iran because it wants to liberate its women from the oppression of women is a load of malarkey, and that's so obvious to anyone who looks at it. But it's more than that, right? It's more than that. It's this notion that, you should have a plague on both your houses position, right? That's the idea, right? They say to us, okay, Caleb, fine. You can be against the USA attacking Iran, but you can't say that Iran is progressive. You can't say that Iran is anti-imperialist. You have to just say, screw Iran, screw the United States, and plague on both your houses. That's what you have to do. Well, first of all, I'm saying this, and every Iranian I have ever spoken to has told me that they have issues with human rights that need to be addressed. So no, there's no need to deny people have problems. But that said, look throughout the Middle East. Who is the USA aligned with? It's aligned with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It is aligned with the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. It is aligned with the Kuwaiti monarchy. It is aligned with the United Arab Emirates. These are countries that don't have elected governments, that don't have constitutions. These are countries that are autocratic regimes. They sit on top of oil deposits. They sell oil to the United States. They buy huge amounts of weapons from U.S. manufacturers and military-industrial complex. And they have elected, they don't have elected governments. They don't have constitutions, right? And they conduct public beheadings and public floggings and torture. And it's an autocracy that makes no notion of human rights whatsoever. Right? People say, well, in Iran, the elections aren't real. They don't have elections in Saudi Arabia. They say, oh, in Syria, the elections are not, fair. Well, they don't have elections in the United Arab Emirates, folks. They don't have elections in Kuwait, right? The countries that are being attacked by the United States, compared to the countries aligned with the United States, are far more democratic, right? It's the Syrian Arab Republic. It's the Islamic Republic of Iran. It was the Republic of Iraq under Saddam Hussein, right? Afghanistan in the 1980s. It was the People's Democratic Republic that the USA was trying to overthrow. These countries have their problems, right? There's corruption, there's all kinds of problems in these countries, but they're more advanced and they're more industrialized. Go to Iran and look at the huge highways they've built. Look at the huge steel mills. Look at the fact they build their own cars in Iran. They build their own steel in Iran. All of this, right? Where you go to Saudi Arabia, they've got oil and sand and a lot of weapons, right? They're not industrialized, right? And of course, Lisa Hauserman is pointing out that the USA aligns itself with Israel. And that is absolutely true. And the building up of Israel and the arming and billions of dollars spent, on Israel every year, it's pretty absurd. So this notion that because of identity politics we should align with imperialism in the Middle East is malarkey. Does that mean women's rights is not important? No. Does that mean that LGBT and that whole thing isn't important? Of course not. But this notion that in a situation where the USA is trying to economically crush a country that is independent and a competitor, that notion, that needs to just be thrown out. Now, I was also asked about class relations in the United Kingdom. Well, I'm not in the United Kingdom. I am in the United States, but I know that there are some big contradictions there, right? And that Brexit was the working class that wanted Brexit, right? That the working class knew overwhelmingly that the European Union was bad for them, right? That there are economic problems there, just like the problems we have here. And I'm going to get to that later. I am going to talk about something very, very important very shortly. But, the working class wanted Brexit, and, the Labour Party opposed Brexit, and that's a situation we're in. I can't tell you how excited I am about the Workers' Party of the UK. George Galloway, CPGBML, Jyoti Brar, they are in there, and they are building a new, exciting, anti-identity politics, pro-working class, pro-Brexit socialist party. I'm excited about it. I'm not a British citizen, and I'm not involved. I'm not a member of any political parties at this point. But it's very, very exciting. I'm following it very, very closely. The Workers' Party of the United Kingdom sounds exciting. It's the most exciting thing I've heard about. I'm also excited about Scottish independence. I know they don't agree with me about that, and that's okay. But, there's some exciting stuff going on over there in response to Labour's epic defeat, right? The Jeremy Corbyn leadership of the Labour Party tanked. We're supposed to look at that and say, oh, that means you got to be right-wing and conservative. Well, no. You're supposed to look at that and say that's the Labour Party needs to become a working-class party. It needs to stop supporting Brexit, and it needs to get out of the pessimistic mindset that has dominated leftism. It needs to stop being a party of identity politics, and it needs to be a working-class socialist party. Now, Arthur is asking me about Soviet jokes. Well, if you go to Wikipedia, they have a whole page full of old Soviet jokes, and I'm not going to repeat those jokes here because they're not really for me. I'm not Russian, and I would tell them in a way that would, it's almost like cultural appropriation. I hate to use like an identity politics term, but here I am. Um, you know, um, someone's asking me about something else. Let me write that down. Um, but I don't know. I mean, it's not my field. And a lot of those jokes are pretty pessimistic. A lot of those jokes are pretty, you know, sarcastic, right? It's kind of sarcasm about communism, kind of sarcasm about, and there was a lot of that, right? The demoralization, right? The time of the fall of the Soviet Union, the Soviet Union didn't fall because average working people wanted it to fall. The Soviet Union fell because a section of the Soviet Communist Party sold it down the river. And the majority of the people in the Soviet Union wanted to keep the Soviet Union. They voted to keep the Soviet Union. They voted for the Communist Party even after the Russian Federation was formed. But they weren't willing to fight for it. They weren't willing to go and put their lives on the line for it because they had been actively depoliticized, right? I mean, an anecdote I always heard, was somebody said that they went to a factory one time and they were an American communist and they were there. And someone walked up to them and they said, you're a communist? They said, yeah. And they said, well, I always liked the communists. I just wish they would have let me eat with them. And the worker proceeded to tell a story about how in his factory, the people that were part of the Communist Party got to eat at a special table and they got food that was way nicer than everyone else's, right? They said, I liked the communists. Things were better when the communists were running it. I wish they would have let me eat with them. But because in the factory, the workers that were in the Communist Party got to eat really nice food and got to sit at a special table, and they excluded everyone else at the factory. And it was stuff like that, where kind of politics was kind of being, average people were being told to kind of stay out of politics. A message was sent during the Stalin era, that getting involved in politics was dangerous, that it was, things could go wrong and you could end up on the wrong side and never be heard from again. And because of that, when it came time to actually fight to defend the Soviet Union, there were a lot of people who were just kind of pessimistic. And a lot of those jokes you'll find, on lists of Russian jokes kind of reflect that, kind of a sarcasm. And thank you very much, Fred, for the super chat. And I very appreciate it. But yeah, a lot of the jokes that you'll find, they kind of reflect that cynicism. And workers, they did go out and defend the Soviet Union from Nazi invasion very heroically. 26 million Soviet people died to defend the Soviet Union. And World War II, still to this day, is called the Great Patriotic War. It's a vital part of the identity of the Russian and Soviet peoples. But yeah, in the 80s, late 80s, 90s, when it was time to defend the Soviet Union, people had been so actively depoliticized, especially following the death of Stalin and the rise of Khrushchev. There was kind of an attitude, well, people at the top handle this. Politics is for the bosses, for the managers. And it was due to that the Soviet Union fell. And, the jokes are funny. I mean, I can get the humor in them. But at the same time, I mean, they kind of reflect a kind of sadness. So now somebody else asked me about am I skeptical of people who turn activism into a career? No. No, I'm not. No. Here's the thing, right? I can see where you're coming from. You might say, well, people should be politically active because they believe in it, but people have to eat. The labor movement, right? And this is the problem. You can't have a labor union and not have a labor bureaucracy and not have people whose job it is to run the labor union. And those folks are going to get paid, right? And there's a lot of, Teamster guys who make huge salaries. There's a lot of leaders of the AFL-CIO who make huge salaries. And are you going to argue that, oh, well, they shouldn't make that kind of money because, they should just believe in the cause? Well, they got to eat, you know what I mean? And skilled people are harder to replace, right? And bureaucracy is an issue. And, I guess, and it's not just labor unions, right? But all kinds of activist groups have people employed that are on staff that make it happen, right? And, I'm not opposed to that. I'm not skeptical of that. I think it can be a problem It can be a problem if it becomes about making money, right? If it stops being about what the cause is, right? If it becomes simply a racket. And that's how a lot of the labor bureaucrats really feel, right? We know that, right? There's a long history of corrupt union bosses who don't care about the workers. They're just taking in that dues money, and they actually will actively hold back the workers because they don't want to take any risk, right? So I understand that you should be wary of that problem. But the question is politics in command? Maybe the person, I mean, maybe they're full-time active and all of that, but do they still have principles? Do they still adhere to those principles, right? The question isn't, do they do it full-time for a living, right? I mean, no political movement can function without people who do it for full-time for a living. That's just a fact, right? And as someone who spent a long time, in certain political organizations, I can just tell you that, it's great to have people volunteer. You need volunteers far more. You need far more volunteers, but you got to have people on staff. You got to have people who it's their bread and butter, it's their livelihood. It's important. It's a really, really important thing. I don't fault people for doing that. What becomes a problem is when when the goals kind of fade away and it just becomes about making money. And that's a problem that's happened in the labor movement. People know about that with the union bureaucracy, right? A lot of times union bosses don't really want to expand the union. They just want to keep collecting their dues. They don't want to risk organizing new workplaces because they want to, they want to collect new dues. They don't want to invest the money into a new organizing campaign. So this is a problem, right? And so the question becomes, is the entity or the person or the institution being depoliticized because of the money involved? Or is this simply a way that the people involved, some of them, are able to pay their bills and feed their kids and have their career while they do important political work? I think that's the issue there. And I think how that's implemented is something that people wrangle with, and it's handled differently in different organizations, and people have different mechanisms for dealing with it. So thank you for that question. Now, folks, I wanted to take some time to talk about something. I've talked about it before, but I'm going to talk about it in a way I haven't talked about it before, because it's very, very important, and I realize how important it is, but it's not important for the reasons that we're being told it's important. So I'm sure you've seen here, basic income seeps into political debates. Andrew Yang. Right, Andrew Yang is a very, very, very important presidential candidate. I'm not endorsing him. I don't endorse any candidates, and I don't agree with his solution, universal basic income. However, Andrew Yang is extremely important, and I'm going to reiterate that as I just got my hands on his book. And thanks, shout out to my friend George who gave it to me. Look, I'm going to read to you just a couple paragraphs from this book, and you'll understand why this candidate is very, very important. This is his book, The War on Normal People. He says, efficiency doesn't love normal people. It loves getting things done in the most cost-effective way possible. The Obama White House published a report on December 12th that predicted 83% of jobs where people make less than $20 an hour will be subject to automation and replacement. Between 2.2 and 3.1 million car, bus, and truck drivers in the United States will be eliminated by the advent of self-driving cars. We are confident that between 2 to 3 million Americans who drive vehicles for a living will lose their jobs within the next 10 to 15 years. Automation has already eliminated about 4 million manufacturing jobs in the United States since 2000. The U.S. labor force participation rate is now at only 62.9%, a rate below that of all other industrialized economies and about the same as El Salvador and Ukraine. Goes on to say later. He says, in the United States, we want to believe that the market will resolve most situations. In this case, the market will not solve the problem. Quite the opposite. He says, There is only one entity, the federal government, that can realistically reformat society in a way that will prevent large swaths of the country from becoming jobless or derelict of buildings and broken people. Becoming jobless zones of derelict buildings and broken people. Even if they don't talk about it in public, many technologists fear this backlash. We need a revitalized government to rise to the challenge. Doctors can fix your eyes with lasers, but your local mall just closed. We are living in unprecedented times. The future without jobs will come to resemble either the cultivated benevolence of Star Trek or the desperate scramble for resources in Mad Max. And, read you one thing. He says, we must make the market serve humanity rather than humanity serve the market. The logic of meritocracy is leading us to ruin because we are collectively primed to ignore the voices of millions getting pushed into economic distress by the grinding wheels of automation and innovation. We're figuring they're complaining or suffering because they're losers. We need to break free of this logic of the marketplace before it's too late. This is Andrew Yang. And he says all of that in his book, and he goes into great detail documenting the economic problem that Marxists have been talking about for a long time, been predicting for decades. In the 70s and 80s, Marxists were talking about automation. Right? The 2008 financial meltdown, they were all talking about automation. And now, even as the economy is supposedly doing well, the crisis of overproduction and underconsumption, as John Maynard Keynes called it, hangs over the United States. Right? This is what Karl Marx wrote about constantly. The problem of overproduction. Right? The capitalist is constantly driving to produce as many products as he can at the lowest possible cost, as efficiently as possible, employing as few people in the process as necessary, and as a result of that, right, the number of workers hired continues to go down. Right, the efficiency of the means of production increases. The market soon becomes glutted with products that cannot be sold. Right, you have revolutionization of industrial, production. Huge leaps in technology lead to huge periods of economic downturns. There's this contradiction, right? They talk about the miner's riddle. There's a coal miner, and he's at home with his son. And the son is cold, and he says, "Father, why is it so cold?" And the father says, "Because we cannot afford to buy any coal to heat our home." And he says, "Father, why can we not afford to buy any coal to heat our home?" And he says, "Because I lost my job at the coal mine. They laid me off. They laid us all off at the coal mine." And the son says, "Father, why did they lay you off from your job at the coal mine?" And the father says, "Because there is too much coal." Capitalism is the only system in history where people starved because there is too much food. In every system that existed before, there was starvation, but people starved because there was not enough food. Under capitalism, people starve because there is too much food. During the financial crisis of 2008, which I lived through, it was a pivotal moment for me. That was my college years. I saw with my own eyes, right, a situation where people became homeless because there were too many houses. In systems of the past, there was always homelessness, but people were homeless because there wasn't enough housing. But the housing bubble burst in 2008. Americans couldn't afford to keep buying houses, right? The easy loans that Alan Greenspan had given people to keep them buying houses, it stopped. They weren't paying them back. The housing bubble burst. And Americans outside of, Las Vegas, Nevada, were living in tent cities. And people became homeless. I remember I was going to college in a suburb of Cleveland, and we kept finding homeless people sleeping in the woods near the college, or sleeping in they would sneak into the Conservatory of Music and hide in a practice room and sleep there to keep warm. All across the United States, people became homeless in 2008 because there were too many houses. This is the problem of capitalism. The more efficient you make production, the less workers you need. Abundance creates poverty. That is the reality of the system of capitalism that we live under. Abundance leads to poverty. The more efficient it is to produce things, the poorer people become. Right? Because under capitalism, the worker can only exist by selling his labor power to a capitalist. The worker sells himself to a capitalist and in exchange is given a wage. And if the capitalist is able to advance technology to the point that he does not need workers, which he's constantly trying to do with automation, the result is pretty soon the market will be glutted with products that cannot be sold. And as a result, you'll have all kinds of hungry people and you'll have all kinds of food that can't be purchased. This is the boom-bust cycle of capitalism. John Maynard Keynes, the British economist, referred to it as a problem of underconsumption. But Karl Marx, long before John Maynard Keynes, labeled it the problem of overproduction. And that is what it is. Right? The capitalist is driving as hard as he can to produce goods, and he's producing it by trying to do it as efficiently as possible and paying people as little as he can get away with. And as a result, people cannot afford to buy back the products, right? This is the problem. And no matter how good the capitalist wants to be, the problem still exists, right? And there's a whole mathematical formula. The worker simply cannot afford to buy back what he produces. It's not possible. This is the problem of capitalism. Overproduction. Now, what is the solution? The solution, we have all known since 1848. We've known it since before then. The banks and the factories and the major industries should be operated in order to serve public good and not profits. Instead of having profit be the basis of a production, the state should control the means of production. The economy should be rationally planned to serve the people. That's the solution, right? If you want to get rid of this problem of capitalism, this contradiction, the solution is for the economy to be rationally planned. It's that simple. And we know that when capitalist societies have a huge technological leap, that it is followed by a huge economic crisis. World War I. The First World War came after huge technological leaps. That's what it was. Huge inventions had been created. There was more automation. And as a result, all kinds of workers were outcast and starving. There were huge strikes and protests and political problems. And ultimately, it spilled over into World War I. The imperialist bloodbath was a disaster. And in the 1920s, you had the Roaring Twenties. And the world was rebuilding from World War I. And Henry Ford came along and had huge leaps in assembly line production and all of that. And, Fordism. And they actually had a slogan in the 1920s. They said, Ford has overtaken Marx, or Ford has disproved Marx. This was everywhere. Newspapers said this. Henry Ford, the genius of modern capitalism, when his efficiency, Ford has defeated Marx. It was a very common expression in the United States. Karl Marx said capitalism doesn't work. Henry Ford, with his invention of assembly line production and the Model T and cars, Henry Ford has defeated Karl Marx. Henry Ford has disproved Karl Marx. Henry Ford has overtaken Karl Marx. But what happened? 1929, the Great Depression, and the economy crashed. Why? For the same reason that it had happened in the lead up to World War I. A huge leap in technological efficiency leads to a huge economic downturn. In the 1920s, all of a sudden, we were producing more stuff than ever. More cars, more radios, more. There were no TVs then. More cars, more radios, more irons, they were producing stuff, and pretty soon the market was glutted with products that couldn't be sold. Well, the reality is that Henry Ford's innovations that led to the Great Depression, the 1930s, the innovations of various inventors that led to the crisis that eventually led to World War I, were absolutely nothing compared to the huge leaps made with the computer revolution. What's happening now with computers is huge. Huge. Right? And self-driving cars, we are facing one of the biggest technological leaps in human history. And as a result, millions and millions of people have no place at the assembly lines. People aren't going to be able to buy the products, right? Overproduction, underconsumption, whatever you want to call it. This same problem that has always haunted capitalism is there. So what do you do about it? What do you do about it? Well, Andrew Yang, he's thinking about this based on an assumption. And thank you, David Fox, for that. It's like socialism. You read this, socialism is not possible, right? The government controlling the means of production and planning the economy. It's like he's never heard of Karl Marx. You read this book. It's like amazing. Of course he has, because he's from the capitalist class. He's a Silicon Valley tech guy. So what do you do about this? What's the answer? Well, this is why he's important. He's sounding the alarm and pointing out what the problem is and putting forward the wrong solution. What Andrew Yang represents and this will blow your mind, was on the front cover of the Wall Street Journal's Weekend Review this weekend. Thank you, Lawrence Chu, and I'm glad you're just kidding. Right? There are two trends within the ruling class of the United States right now. And there have been for a long time. Really, since the Cold War began, there have been two trends among the ruling class of the United States. There has been the managerial monopoly trend and the profiteering nouveau riche trend. It's two tendencies. Right? I talk about those four super majors that have all the power. Right? Are they worried every day when they look at the stock market? Not particularly. Are they worried that they're going to go out of business? Are you kidding? They're thinking long term. Right? They make such huge profits, controlling the whole world, basically, with the markets and reaping super profits. They're thinking long term. How do we stay in power? How do we gradually fade our competitors out of power? How do we gradually make sure that there's not really any social unrest? They're thinking in managerial terms, because they're big enough that they'll maintain their monopoly. Whereas the Koch brothers, Betsy DeVos, Bernie Marcus, the owner of Home Depot, the Koch brothers, I mentioned them already. Who else? Sheldon Adelson, the real estate guy out in Nevada. Those folks, they're thinking about their short-term profits. They are wealthy, but they're not part of the club. They're not of the richest of the rich. They're new money, and they want to make more money. And so these two factions have different worldviews. The nouveau riche, the fracking companies, Bernie Marcus, Sheldon Adelson, Betsy DeVos, who, I mean, where did her money come from? From Tupperware parties, right? From what do you call it? Amway, right? Those folks want the government out. They don't want to pay taxes. They want to make as much money as they possibly can. Laissez-faire, free market. They want to get out there and compete. They resent ExxonMobil and BP and Chevron, for their giant, huge monopolies. They want a free market. They think everyone could get rich if they just tried hard enough, because look, they did. That's what they want. They really believe in this free market stuff. They really believe in Ayn Rand and objectivism and Milton Friedman, and that capitalism and free markets are the best because it worked out so well for them. They really believe all that stuff. But the richest of the rich, the managerial bourgeoisie, the monopolists, right? The Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the DuPonts, their view is much more managerial. They don't want free markets. They want stability. They don't want to have big, huge wars and sell lots of weapons. They want to gradually push competing countries off the stage in the quietest, calmest, gradualist way. They favor soft power. They favor social control. They are the richest of the rich, and they are the most long-term thinking. And they don't like populism. Right? They think, how do we stay in power? The issue for them isn't how do we make our profits go up immediately. The issue is, how do we make sure that there's not social unrest and chaos? How do we make sure that the USA and Western capitalism dominates the global market? How do we prevent any kind of socialism or anti-imperialism from emerging in the world? But how do we do it in the long-term, strategic way? It's a different approach. And I talked about it with Iran, right? The Obama administration was in with the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and the richest of the rich. And their strategy is to talk all nice to Iran and get Iran to sit down at the table, get Iran to start doing business with American businesses, get American entities in Iran, gradually start sowing the seeds of unrest in Iranian society, dividing Iranians, playing them against each other, maybe having some kind of color revolution, and then toppling the Iranian government. That's what was done with Libya, right? Obama was very, very friendly to Gaddafi, right? You'll remember that, right? Gaddafi said Obama was his little African son. They freed the Lockerbie bomber, and he was returned and welcomed as a hero to Libya. All kinds of trade and investment was going on. And all that time, American intelligence was slipping people in there, and the Muslim Brotherhood was slipping people in there. And it set the stage for, in 2011, they were able to overthrow the petro-socialist state-run economy of Libya and topple it. It was a long-term strategy. And it cost lots of money. They spent lots of money, but they made lots of money in the long term, right? Blowing Libya off the markets, a huge oil-producing country, no longer selling oil in competition with Western capitalism. Oil production in Libya is about 5% of what it was under Gaddafi. The payout was there, but it required patience and a long-term strategy, right? Obama didn't want to make a big war against Gaddafi. Obama wanted to gradually, strategically, through soft power manipulation, bring down the Libyan government. And he did it. And he wanted to do the same thing with Iran. Whereas Trump is in with Betsy DeVos and Sheldon Adelson and, Bernie Marcus and the Koch brothers and the fracking companies. And they don't want a long-term strategy against Iran. They need that oil price to stay up. That's what they need. They need that oil price to stay as high as possible so they don't lose their money. They want to make money selling weapons to Saudi Arabia. Trump's already talking about expanding NATO to the Middle East. They want to make lots of money, from sending American troops over there and military contractors and supplying them. They're tied in with that Likud party in Israel that also wants to make lots of money, setting up military bases. And they want to make money in the short term. Keep the oil price up, sell lots of money, weapons manufacturers, bombs, wars, drones. That's what they're about. They're about short-term profits. Whereas Obama is about that long-term managerial, controlled, strategic, soft power demolition strategy. That's the division between the ruling class, right? The CIA versus the Pentagon, the ultra-rich versus the nouveau riche, the new money, right? That's the divide in American politics. Trump represents an uprising by the new money, by the low levels of capital. And Obama and Andrew Yang and others represent that long-term thinking managerial section of the ruling class. And the Trump faction doesn't give a hoot, right? People that are poor, well, they need to get a job, right? They screw them. They can get a job, right? Ben Shapiro, the voice of this conservative movement, he famously said, why is socialism bad? Because socialism is bad, he says, because it's the idea that I owe you shit because you're breathing. You can see that. Socialism is bad because, quote, it says, quote, I owe you shit because you're breathing. Right? And to an average person who's not really thinking deep, that makes sense, right? Yeah, why do I owe you something just because you're breathing? Yeah, that's dumb. I don't owe nobody nothing, right? On the surface, that sounds okay. Aha. But here's the problem. Do you want to live in a society where no one has any food? Right? Keep your food, right? You can have eating, but do you want to live in a society where there's mobs of starving people outside? How would you like to be the only person with food in a society where everyone else is starving? Do you think your life is going to be pleasant? And that managerial section is saying, whoa, maybe we do owe people shit because they're breathing. We don't want them to have a revolution. We don't want there to be chaos in the streets. We don't want there to be demagogues and political groups, mobilizing hungry people. Let's manage them. The profiteering, short-term, nouveau riche say, I don't owe nobody nothing because they're breathing. Cut social programs. These people should get a job. I'm rich. This is my stuff. You can't take it from me. Free markets. Right? And the managerial section of the bourgeoisie is saying, whoa, wait a second. Hold your horses there. Maybe we should give people free money. Maybe we should manage people more effectively. That seems to be the division. And the reason Andrew Yang is important, I think, is not because he advocates universal basic income, because I don't think that's the solution. I think socialism is the solution. However, Andrew Yang is beating the drum. He's basically, and if you look at his campaign, it's almost like he's been assigned to do this. Right? There's whole sections of the ruling class he's been assigned to beat the drum and warn his own class and warn society about the pending danger of overproduction and how can we transition away from it. That's basically what's going on here. And this is where it gets weird, because Marxists are optimists. Marxists are optimistic. We think that tomorrow is better than today. We think that eventually we can get to a society that has so much material abundance where we don't need a state. We believe in man's humanity to man, brotherhood, solidarity, people working together. We believe in getting over greed and profits. We are very, very optimistic. but among the ruling class, who are the most optimistic? It's the nouveau riche. I hate to say it, doesn't make any sense, but it's true. The nouveau riche, they got rich, everyone can get rich. We can go out and produce. We can make a lot more money. We need economic growth. Marxists believe in economic growth. The nouveau riche believe in economic growth. And among the ruling class, who are the pessimists? Who are the pessimists? It's those managerial voices. There's too many people in the world. Right? There's limited resources, right? We got to stay on oil. We have to stay on oil. We have to have an oil-based economic order because that's how capitalism functions. That's how Wall Street and London stay at the center of the economy. But so what do we do? Well, we just got to gradually have people stop using as many resources, because if not, climate change is going to kill us all. I mean, we have to just deindustrialize. We have to move backwards. Economic growth is bad. Slow growth, that's the answer. No growth, right? Growth is bad. Right? We need to gradually start depopulating the planet. We need to start managing the masses of people, gradually fading them out. This is the view. The richest of the rich, who tend to be more socially liberal and tend to be aligned with the liberal wing of Western capitalism, are pessimists. They're fundamentally pessimistic. Whereas the right wing of the ruling class is fundamentally, in their outlook, optimistic. Anyone can make money. Free markets are good. Growth. They believe in growth. Whereas the richest of the rich no longer believe in it. Socialists and Marxists believe in growth, but they believe in order to have growth, we have to have rational growth, not growth on the basis of profits. We have to get away from capitalism. We have to overturn capitalism in order to really have sustainable, rational, healthy growth. All right? We have to get out of the oil-based economic order. The banks, factories, and industries have to be organized to serve public goods and not profits. We have to have an economy that functions to serve the people, not to make money for a private group of owners. So we're optimistic. But the people in the ruling class who are friendlier to us are pessimistic. This is a contradiction that we socialists have to deal with. This is a problem. Now, I'm being asked how I define middle class. This is a problem. How do we deal with this contradiction? Right? I mean, this is a fundamental view. Socialists are optimistic, but the managerial bourgeoisie is pessimistic. And the new left versus the old left was very much a fight between the managerial bourgeoisie seizing control of what is called leftism and the Marxist movement. The Marxist movement is optimistic. The new left is pessimistic. This is the divide. This is the fundamental division among leftist circles. The new left, brought to you courtesy of the CIA and the Congress for Cultural Freedom program that funded socialist and left-wing thought that was anti-Soviet, courtesy of the Frankfurt School, right? Courtesy of, Jackson Pollock paintings, the Aquarian Conspiracy, Marilyn Ferguson, Susan Sontag. The managerial section of the ruling class's pessimism has tried its hardest to wrench control over left-wing activism. What is the greatest example of this? In April of 1970, the United States had its first Earth Day. Now, environmentalism is important, and I'm gonna get to that soon. But, environmentalism is very important. But what was the first Earth Day? In April of 1970, the first Earth Day was held exactly on the 100-year anniversary of Lenin's birth. And all over the planet, people were celebrating Lenin's birthday. In Africa and Asia and Latin America and Russia and China, huge celebrations for the centennial of Lenin's birth. But in the United States, the media somehow missed that. And so did all the communists. And so did all the socialists. And so did all the leftists. Instead, they were marching for Earth Day. All right? Now, I was asked earlier, very conveniently, because it's what I'm talking about my view of climate change. Climate change is a reality. Trust me. It's January today, and I was walking around New York City, and it was 60 degrees outside, right? I mean, if you think that the weather patterns we've been having over the last few years are just normal, or just totally normal, sorry, you're wrong, okay? And that's a tough sell. That is a really tough sell. However, the solution to climate change is getting off of fossil fuels. It's developing a higher mode of energy, a higher fuel source, like fusion energy, like nuclear power. We have to get to a higher fuel source. We cannot defeat climate change by going backwards. The things that have been put forward by international bodies at this point, the idea is, in order to fight climate change, all these countries in Africa that China is helping to build coal power plants, well, they're going to have to sign a treaty, and they're going to be told they're not allowed to do it. No, they got to build windmills. They got to build solar panels. No, can't happen. And we're also going to go to Western countries and implement austerity. Folks, we just have to all be poorer. It's for the environment. That the pessimistic solution to climate change, first of all, it's not going to work. I mean, I'll just be real about that. It's not going to work. Human beings, they procreate. They want more than they already have. This is the nature of human life. We are city builders. We are a city building species. We develop, we build, we invent new things, we create new things. You can't, they always talk about human nature, right? They always ramble about human nature. Well, there's very little, humans act very differently in different circumstances. But one thing that's been very, very clear about human beings for the past 5,000 years is that we tend to improve our situations. We don't want to have less. We don't want to live in greater poverty. We don't. We want to have a better life than we had before. We want to be more comfortable than we were before, right? Human beings believe in progress. Every year we get older than we were the year before. We get better at getting through life than we were. We develop skills. Right? Human beings want the world to get better. And right now, we are in a situation where the way the means of production function, by using fossil fuels, by burning coal, the more we get, the more dangerous the situation is for the earth. So, the only solution is to get beyond those unsustainable fuel sources. We need better, stronger energy than we had before. Right? Helium-3 coming from the moon. Right? The potential for energy from helium-3 is massive. That's why China sent the Chang'e 4 mission to the dark side or the far side of the moon. It was about helium-3, a rare element, an element that is extremely rare on Earth, but is very prevalent on the moon, that has huge energy potential. That's why China is doing all these experiments with different reactors. China, a country with a socialist, state-run planned economy, is trying to get us out of the trap of fossil fuels so that we can have economic development that is sustainable. We can continue to develop, we can have economic growth. And that economic growth is not restrained by the irrationality of capitalism. But the managerial bourgeoisie, the ruling class of Europe and the United States, the big bourgeoisie of the United States, their solution is very different. They say, well, economic growth is over, right? There's too many people. We need to just control them, manage them, and gradually kind of fade them out. If you want to understand the difference in how they see us, as far as the entrepreneurial or the nouveau riche or the conservatives or the free market bourgeoisie see it, we don't exist. We don't exist, right? They don't owe us anything, right? Right? They don't owe us shit because we're breathing, as Ben Shapiro put it. We don't exist. It's like, who are we? We don't matter. To the managerial bourgeoisie, the way they see us is basically the way that the British Empire saw the Roman Catholic peoples of Northern Ireland. It's basically the way that Israel sees the Palestinians. They are these annoying people that we kind of have to tolerate, and we're going to gradually fade them out by managing and controlling them. That's how Israel sees the Palestinians. That's how Northern Ireland, and that's how the British saw the Irish Catholics of Northern Ireland, is just manage them. Gradually fade them out, but manage them. And people do not like to be managed. Right? The reason the Palestinians, there's that whole history of armed activities, is because the Palestinians realize that there is a group of people ruling over them that is gradually trying to fade out their existence, and they don't like it. The reason that in Northern Ireland there was the Troubles, 70s and 80s, again, that was because when communities realize that people are trying to fade them out, trying to just gradually manage them like cattle and make them go away, they fight back. People don't want to be wiped out. People don't want to be gradually destroyed. Right? Puerto Rican people, whole history of that. How, Puerto Rican women would go to the doctor. Right? And they would go to the doctor, and without telling them, they would sterilize them and tie their tubes so they couldn't have children. Right? Well, these Puerto Ricans, there's a lot of them. We don't want to take care of them. Let's just gradually fade them away. Eugenics. Right? The Nazi regime is a great example of this. The Nazi regime actively depopulated the country. And they had a term that they used for people that they wanted to get rid of, and they called them useless eaters. Right? They had a poster of a disabled man. This man is disabled. He cost the German taxpayer this much money, and they started gassing them to death. Right? This is the reality of the managerial view of certain sections of the ruling class. They see the population not, and this is the crazy thing, the lower levels of capital. Right? Donald Trump, in one of his books, he says, I want every American to be rich. That way they can all buy my products, right? They still believe in growth because they're not part of the elite club. But the elite club sees the population as a burden. It's an annoying horde that needs to be managed carefully and dealt with. And I will read you. This is one of the quotes in the front of the Andrew Yang book. Quote, human beings are also animals. To manage 1 million animals gives me a headache. From Terry Gu, founder of Foxconn, the Taiwan-based corporation. That's how the managerial bourgeoisie sees us. They see us as animals, and they are gradually managing us. and people, being naturally optimistic, being naturally productive, being naturally believing in growth, smell this and are getting angry. And as the Wall Street Journal points out, all right, turn the page on this article about managerial power and respect for the working class. That's the basis of the populist uprising. People can smell it a mile away. They don't want to be managed like cattle. The populist uprising that's going on, which is giving support to Trump. I don't support Trump, not at all. But the basis of Brexit, the basis of the political discord, the rise of Bernie Sanders, the rise of interest in socialism, all of this is the people saying we don't want to be managed like cattle any longer. We reject this. We do not want to be gradually phased out. We don't want a government that's like Ben Shapiro and doesn't care about us and doesn't think we exist. But we also don't want a government that's gradually controlling us. Here, we'll give them all a bank transaction, and we'll encourage them not to breed, and we'll give them all a fancy phone so they can be distracted by sparkling lights, and we'll, and maybe they'll be, and gradually they'll just kind of go away, but we'll keep the smarter ones around, and, we'll control. That's the difference. The managerial bourgeoisie versus the entrepreneurial bourgeoisie. That's the divide in our political system. And it makes people sick. People can smell it a mile away. It's like Soylent Green. Right? You ever see that? It's a movie that was made, Charlton Heston, 1970s. See Soylent Green, right? And I'm not going to spoil the ending for you. But it's kind of about this whole issue, right? You have a managerial ruling class and you have an entrepreneurial ruling class. And what's interesting, I was kind of blown away when I read this article in the Wall Street Journal, is it quotes a figure who's very important in the history of Marxism. It says, in 1941, the bestseller, The Managerial Revolution, James Burnham, a disillusioned Marxist of the old-fashioned small-scale bourgeois capitalism, was being succeeded not by socialism, but by a new society dominated by professional managers. Right? So they actually quote on here James Burnham, who was a very important person in American Marxism in the 1940s, in the late 1930s, I should say. Right? And they talk about, this was a big theory in the 1930s, that people said, well, capitalism isn't being replaced by socialism, it's being replaced by this new system of managerialism. And many people pointed out that no, it's not. No, it's not, right? That there is capitalism that is more tightly controlled and regulated, but it's not a new system. Right? That Nazi Germany and Rooseveltism in the United States is all still capitalism. The Soviet Union is socialism. It's not another form of capitalism. And that managerial school that was put forward by James Burnham, it was an incorrect view. But it's interesting that they quote it in this article. And they're talking about working class resentment. Working class resentment. Don't feed the trolls, folks. Working class resentment against this particular view, against the managerial view. The view that human beings are cattle and need to be managed, right? That's what's going on. And folks, the thing is, in socialism, the population isn't viewed as cattle that need to be managed. The population isn't viewed as an annoying horde that needs to be gradually gotten rid of. The population is viewed as an asset. I bet you didn't know this. Or maybe you did. In the Soviet Union, they actually gave medals to women who had more than 10 children. Did you know that? They called them mothers of the Soviet Union. They built all these new universities. They built all these new hospitals and schools and factories. And so they constantly were trying to increase their population. Nazi Germany was trying to decrease its population. The Soviet Union was trying to increase its population. Right? This is a huge, huge difference. Right? Very, very exciting. Very, very exciting. And that's what I would like to see in the United States. We need a government of action to fight for working families. A government that would view every American citizen as an asset and say, how can we invest in you so that you make a better country? We are going to educate you, we're going to give you skills, and we're going to send you out there to go invent something new. We are going to build up our population. We're going to skill up our population. We're going to strengthen our population. Oh my God, folks, I got so mad. So mad today. I'm sitting in a restaurant eating my brunch or whatever, and I'm watching on the news all these young men and women from my city, New York City, are being put on buses to go to airports to get sent to the Middle East. And I thought, God damn it, why are they doing this? The subways here in New York City are a joke. They are breaking down. The delays are ridiculous. Water is not being properly purified, right? I mean, the roads here are crumbling. There is so much work that needs to be done. And these young people in the prime of their lives, full of patriotism, full of a desire to help the country, full of a desire to see things get better, love for their community, kindness, compassion, full of energy, full of strength, physically fit. We need a government of action that instead of sending these people off to Saudi Arabia or United Arab Emirates or wherever the hell to go protect the oil profits of the Koch brothers, should put them to work rebuilding our subways, put them to work rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, building new schools, building new hospitals, right? Think of all the potential there is. We need a government that views the population as an asset, not as useless eaters that need to be managed and gotten rid of, not as people who don't exist, but as an asset. Every American could be potentially capable of making a huge contribution to the country. We need to start investing in our own population and utilizing our own population to build a stronger country. I got angry when I saw people 10 years younger than I am being put on buses. National Guard members, people who have other jobs, for goodness sakes, people who are not full-time military people, getting put on buses to get on planes to go over to Saudi Arabia. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. You want to talk about mismanagement. You want to talk about the government being in dereliction of duty, right? It's interesting. You talk about, if a parent, they talk about child abuse, for example, right? I mean, there's active child abuse, but there's another form of child abuse they call neglect, right? The kid is coming to school in the wintertime and doesn't have a winter coat. That parent is held liable for neglect, right? If a child doesn't have adequate food, that parent is held liable for neglect. I hold the government of the United States liable for criminal neglect. The government of the United States is in dereliction of duty. It is guilty of criminal neglect of the population. When we have a situation where in the richest country in the world, they are unpaving the roads. In 27 different states now, municipalities cannot afford to maintain paved roads, so they have this machine called a reclaimer, and they are taking paved roads and replacing them with dirt and gravel roads, pulling up the asphalt. When you have that kind of a situation, when you have situations like the Flint water crisis, right? When you have situations where power plants are crumbling, right? I remember during Hurricane Sandy, when the power plant in New York City blew up, right? When you have whole sections of New York City on Saturday night losing power because a power station exploded, right? That happened just a couple months ago, right? This is a government that is guilty of criminal neglect of the population. This is criminal. We don't need, Roosevelt, U.S. President Roosevelt used to talk about do-nothing government. We have a crisis in this country of do-nothing government. Well, we need to put an end to do-nothing government. What we need is a government of action that will fight for working families. A government that will take decisive, swift action to address the crisis and improve the lives of working people in this country. It must happen. And it won't just come in terms of rebuilding the infrastructure. It should come in diverting all the money that goes in subsidies to big oil companies, all the money spent on wars to bail out and make profits and beat down the competitors of oil companies should be spent on fusion energy. You know, I have a dream that someday people in the United States will once again be educated, right? We have an educational system in this country that is a joke. They work very, very hard to make us stupid, and we laugh about it. That's one of my frustrations. We Americans, we laugh about it, right? We've all seen it. National Geographic comes out with the statistics every year. Every year. They come out with the same statistics showing us how Americans cannot find their own country on a map. Americans can't tell you what year the country was founded in. We can't find the countries on the map that we're bombing. We don't know anything, and we laugh about it. We go, yeah, we're stupid. Yep, that's true. We're stupid. We've been conditioned to go, yeah, We should be filled with outrage. Our government is actively making our children dumber than we are. And that's what's going on, right? Instead of making the best generation smarter than we are, we have a government that is actively making the next generation dumber, right? That is working very, very hard not to make us better and smarter, not to invest in us as an asset to build a better country, but to make us stupid and passive so we can be managed like cattle and gradually faded out and eliminated as useless eaters, these annoying, useless eaters who get in the way of the Silicon Valley elite and the oil bankers. That's how they see us. This is criminal neglect. This is dereliction of duty. We need to transition towards socialism. I have laid out 4 steps. If we did these 4 things, the United States would be moving towards socialism. Number 1, mass program to rebuild the infrastructure of the country. Hire the unemployed and underemployed young people. Put them to work rebuilding the country. 2, government control of natural resources. Oil should be in the hands of the people. Natural gas should be in the hands of the people. America's coal, America's timber, America's oil, America's natural gas should be operated in a sustainable way. And the profits made from it should go to serve the public and managed and the means of energy. All energy, all natural resources should be state property, right? America's oil, America's gas, America's coal, America's timber should be managed and operated and run in a way that makes America a better country, doesn't put money in the pockets of big corporations and bankers. Number 3, the banking system, right? Every religion in history. You don't have to be a Marxist. Maybe you don't want to read the Communist Manifesto. Read the Bible, read the Torah, read the Quran. Every religion in history, every major religion in history forbids the lending of money at interest. Why? Because when you lend money at interest, you get a group of people who become way, way richer than everyone else. Way richer than everyone else. Why? Because they're making money by having money. They become a creditor class. And pretty soon the government is in debt to them. And pretty soon everyone is in debt to them. And they have all the power. And we're in a situation now where the government doesn't even print money. The Federal Reserve prints money, right? And the Federal Reserve prints money. That's a violation of the U.S. Constitution. But regardless, we are in a situation, right, where it needs to be changed. We need banking. We need banking to be in the hands of the state. There should be a state monopoly on banking. Right? If somebody wants to go start a business, they should go and make the case that that business will be beneficial to the community And if that's the case, we'll lend them the money to do it. And furthermore, when they pay back the loan, the interest will go into the public budget. And we will use that interest in order to build a better country and build more hospitals, build more schools, etc. And the fourth plank that would transition the USA towards socialism would be to start investing in the people. We would implement Franklin Delano Roosevelt's economic Bill of Rights. Every American deserves a decent education. Every American should have a job. We can find work for them to do. They should be employed. Every American should be able to see a doctor when they're sick. All right? If we implemented Roosevelt's economic Bill of Rights, if we moved toward a state monopoly on the lending of money and state control of banking, if we nationalized the energy markets and natural resources were under public control, if we mobilized the population to rebuild the country, if we did those four things, the USA would not be a capitalist country any longer. At that point, the means of production, the banks, factories, and industries would be operating to serve public good and not profits. And the USA at that point would be on the road to transitioning towards socialism. Those four things, right? At that point, we would have a government of action that was fighting for working families, and we would have a government that was based in communities and loyal to the people, and we would be on the road toward having a socialist, state-run, planned economy. I've said it many times before. Those are the four steps that would transition the USA towards socialism. Now, folks, I'm speaking in general terms, but I know people have their questions, and so I'm going to answer questions, and I can keep going for a little while here. I'm not in any rush to get here. So I had a super chat earlier, and I was asked to define middle class. That's interesting. How do you define middle class? So Marxism defines class by relationship to the means of production, right? The ruling class are those who own banks, factories, and industries. The working class are those who sell their labor, right? Those who own means of production are the capitalist class. Those who sell their labor power to those who own means of production are the working class. And, Marxism goes beyond that and says, okay, so what about, for example, someone who owns a small business, right? Somebody owns a bar, someone owns a restaurant, someone owns, they weave baskets and they sell them, right? They own their own means of production. Are they part of the ruling class? Obviously not, right? They're what you would call the petty bourgeoisie because they are technically owning their own means of production, but they aren't the ruling class of society, right? And in order to function, they're basically controlled by banks, and at the end of the day, they're not technically in the working class, but they're allies of the working class, right? And so some people say, well, the middle class is the petty bourgeoisie in the Marxist sense. But then there are other people who talk about, okay, when we talk about middle class in the United States, we're more talking about income level, right? And those with a median level of income, something close to the median income of the United States, they are the middle class, right? And when people define class in terms of income, right? And then there's this whole thing about America's middle class, right? And then there's the whole thing about the labor aristocracy and the fact that, that there are workers who, because, and people talk about the construction trades and the skilled trades and the craft unions and, that because of imperialism, sections of the U.S. working class are making enough money that then they are more loyal to their bosses against the other workers, and the 1950s and, the white layer of industrial workers, the layer of white industrial workers who were very, very right-wing and pro-war and chauvinistic, and that was based on the fact that they were a labor aristocracy, an aristocracy of labor that stratified the working class. That's a whole thesis from Lenin. There's different ways to talk about what middle class actually means. In the United States, basically what it means is no one in the United States thinks they're rich and no one in the United States thinks they're poor. Everyone in the United States, for the most part, thinks they're in the middle class. People can be, on the edge of starving to death and they think that they are in the middle class. People can be millionaires and billionaires and think that they're in the middle class. It's a weird part of American mindset that they insist everyone in the United States no matter what, insists they are middle class. And it's a weird aspect of American psychology. I don't even know what it means. It might be based on this American dream, everyone can make it. It might be based on the belief if you're rich, that's shameful somehow because you're privileged and you're not working hard. But if you're poor, that means you're lazy. So it's like everyone wants to be middle class is the only way, according to the American mind, you can be moral. If you're poor, that's immoral. If you're rich, that's immoral. So if you're middle class, you're okay. I don't know what it is. I mean, everyone in America thinks they're middle class, right? Marxism defines class by relationship to the means of production. In Marxism, the middle class would be like the petty bourgeoisie. There's also the theory of the labor aristocracy, which is a very important point from Lenin, which I've talked about in a lot of other videos. So that's what that means. I hope I answered your super chat, and thank you for it. But one thing I wanted to talk about, I wanted to get more informational on here because I know a lot of people like these lives, not because I'm rambling about what I would do if I was the president, but because I talk about Marxism. And, I just read about how James Burnham, the big trot, he was a Trotskyist who turned into this managerial guy. I talked about him and when you're first getting involved in socialist and leftist groups, it can be very confusing. Right? You go there, you see all these different groups, and you're like, what in the world? And there's this, and there's that, and people get confused by it, and I thought I might do a quick overview of the socialist and communist movement. Just like, not even an overview, but like a navigation. Just quickly. Not even giving my opinion until the end, just telling you basically who people are, right? So, and thank you, Mike Benedito. I really appreciated the super chat. But, like a quick overview. All right. This is like a who's who of communists and socialists. Okay. So Karl Marx, right, wrote the Communist Manifesto, 1848. And he argued in the Communist Manifesto that the workers of different countries needed to be unified. And so he created something called the International Working Men's Association. And it was Marx and a lot of different people. And it was called the First International. And it didn't even, it dissolved before Marx died. And Marx was fighting with different anarchists, and it fell apart. After Marx's death, in Germany, people that were inspired by Marxism in the 1880s started something called the Second International. And the Second International, they didn't use the word communist because they didn't want to be associated with anarchists and people that were violent. So they used the word socialist and the word social democratic or social democracy. And all over Europe in the 1880s, 1890s, you had the rise of social democratic parties, the Social Democratic Party of Germany, the Socialist Party of France, the Labour Party of Britain. These were Marxist parties that were part of the Second International, and they called themselves Social Democrats or socialists. In the USA, you had the Socialist Party. That's what emerged in the United States. You had the Socialist Party of Eugene Debs. All over Europe, it was a big movement, 1880s, 1890s, 1910s. You had the rise of social democracy, and it was all groups that were part of the Second International. And basically, the Second International is still around. It's called the Socialist International. And for a while, the Democratic Socialists of America and the USA were part of it. And the Socialist Party USA was also part of it at one point, and it is not anymore. And you have the Labour Party in the UK. You've got the German Social Democratic Party, the SDP. You've got, all kinds of groupings that are part of it. Norway, the Social Democratic Party of Norway, and this is the Second International. All right? Social democracy, the Second International. Technically, the Second International dissolved after World War I broke out, but they reformed it in the 1920s, and they reformed it again. And now, today, it's called the Second International. Social democracy. Now, what makes social democracy unique is that it believes in a gradual transition to socialism, and it sees socialism as kind of emerging out of capitalism, right? That the capitalism gradually turns into socialism one step at a time. right? Bernstein revisionism, whatever. That's the Second International. That's DSA. That's the Socialist Party in the United States. That's like the Labour Party in the UK. That's that. So then, 1917, you had the Russian Revolution. And the Russian Revolution happened. And the Russian Revolution happened because the Bolsheviks had opposed World War I. The Bolsheviks saw all the Second International parties as sellouts and traitors. Second International didn't support the Russian Revolution and was opposed to it, and most of the Second International parties had supported World War I. So Lenin said they needed to form a third international. A third international. And the third international, they didn't want to call themselves social democrats because they didn't want to be associated with social democracy. So they called themselves the Communist International. Comintern, the Third International, the Comintern. And all over the world, you had communist parties being formed, and the communist parties were parties that were part of the international, right? You had, the Communist Party USA was formed in the United States, the Communist Party of Britain, the Communist Party of France, the Communist Party of Germany, the Communist Party of Japan. These were third international parties, right? The Third International was technically dissolved during the Second World War, but there's still something called the International Conference of Communist and Workers' Parties, and that's the communist parties. Those are the parties of the Third International. The USA, it's the Communist Party USA. So then, Trotsky, right? Leon Trotsky didn't like the Soviet Union, thought Stalin was selling out the revolution and was not truly revolutionary. Leon Trotsky formed the Fourth International, and now today there's like 6 different groups that claim that they are the Fourth International. So Leon Trotsky and his followers called themselves Fourth International. And that's Trotskyism. And Trotskyism, as a global movement, tends to divide into 3 categories. There's millions of, I shouldn't say millions, but there's many different Trotskyist groups, but there's basically 3 kinds. Among Trotskyists, you have mainline Trotskyists, and those are folks who they say that the Soviet Union was socialist or it was a workers' state, but it's deformed. They say China is a workers' state, but it's deformed. They don't really like the socialist countries, but they admit that they have socialized property. They kind of reluctantly will say, okay, they don't have capitalism. They don't like them. They're into trade unions. They always want to form a labor party. They want the labor unions to form parties. They're against whoever the U.S. imperialists are against, but they also claim they're against war. They're into trade unions. That's like mainline Trotskyism. Socialist alternative in the United States, the international Marxist tendency, and they're always agitating about a labor party. They love labor unions. They're against whoever the imperialists are against, but they kind of recognize that, the socialist countries are not capitalist. That's mainline Trotskyism. Then you have what's called neo-Trotskyism or third camp Trotskyism. And that's the ISO. That's James Burnham. And that's people who say that the socialist countries, they were never socialist, right? They were state capitalists, they're brutal dictatorships, and they're academics and they're intellectuals. They're into feminism, they're into LGBT rights, they're almost kind of like anarchists or something. And they call themselves Trotskyists, but they're neo-Trotskyists. Their difference with Trotsky, there was a book called In Defense of Marxism. There's another book called The Struggle for a Proletarian Party. Trotsky said the Soviet Union, despite having bad leaders, was still a deformed workers' state. These people didn't agree with it. That was the difference, right? They're the neo-Trotskyites, or the third camp Trotskyites, and they're new left activists, basically. They're academics, and they're new left liberal activists. ISO in the United States, International Socialist Tendency, International Socialist Organization. They're third camp Trotskyites. And then you have this other tendency you can call orthodox Trotskyism. And that's Trotskyists that are nuts. I don't know how to put it there's no nice way of putting it, right? So you got mainline Trotskyists that are into the trade union thing. And then you got ISO types that don't like any of the socialist countries and focus on kind of liberal middle class issues. And then you got nuts, right? I mean, people that think, that space aliens are going to start World War III and will tell you that World War II is still going on because Trotsky said World War II could only end with a workers' revolution. So therefore, World War II is still going on because there has been no workers' revolution. Or say things like, pedophilia should be legalized or, all kinds of, and those folks, they're like, if Trotsky were alive, he would be in their party. Their parties have 5 or 6 people in them, or 30 people at most, but they're the one true party. They're the vanguard of the vanguard of the vanguard of the vanguard, and they obsess with Trotsky, and they live in this kind of little isolated world, and you talk to them, and 90% of what they do is scream at other little tiny Trotskyist groups that are just as irrelevant as they are, and they're kind of living in this alternate reality. Those are orthodox Trotskyists, right? You talk about the Spartacist League, the League for the Revolutionary Party, the Internationalist Group. There's a million of them. I mean, a million of them. Revolutionary Regroupment, and the International Bolshevik Tendency, and again, tiny little groups that do nothing but fight with each other, and some of them have really far out beliefs about pedophiles and space aliens, and right. So you got the nutty Trotskyists, the orthodox Trotskyists, you got the mainline Trotskyists, and then you have the new left Trotskyists, right? And that's Trotskyism. So then, right, let's keep going, right? China, right? We know China and the Soviet Union had a falling out. China felt that the communist parties in the Soviet Union that they were aligned with wasn't revolutionary enough. So in the 60s, you had the rise of, like they call them Maoist groups, but they insisted they were anti-revisionist groups or Marxist-Leninist parties, right? And every country has them, right? And they're like Communist Party, Marxist-Leninist. They'll have Marxist-Leninist in parentheses. In the USA, there's the Revolutionary Communist Party. And those are groups that were aligned with China, right? They were breakaways from the old Communist Party that were aligned with China. And basically, wherever you go in the world, you had during the Cold War these kind of parties. Every country in the world had a communist party that was aligned with the Soviet Union. Every country in the world had a social democratic party that was a remnant of social democracy. In a lot of countries, those are the ruling parties, like, in Norway, Sweden, places like that, Britain for a while. The Second International Party was the ruling party, right? In every country, you usually had a Trotskyist party. Usually you had a lot, of Trotskyist parties. You had a Trotskyist party. In every country in the world, you had Maoist groups, right? And that was the world communist movement, basically, right? You had Second International, Third International, Trotskyists, and Maoists. That's basically where it was at. What's interesting, though, and this is what's interesting, is people want to know my political heritage. It's no secret that for a long time I was part of the Workers' World Party. What was the Workers' World Party? Well, the Workers' World Party was originally a Trotskyist group, but it became kind of a Communist Party knockoff, right? And in most countries you have that, right? In India, you have the Socialist Unity Center of India. It's basically the Communist Party of India, but it's a slightly more radical knockoff, right? In Chile, you have the Communist Party of Chile, and you have the MIR, the Movement of the Revolutionary Left, the MIR. And it's basically the same as the Communist Party in its beliefs, but slightly more radical, right? And that's what the Workers' World Party was in the United States. It started out as a Trotskyist group, but, it gradually became the slightly more radical version of the Communist Party. The Communist Party focused on electoral activism, on aligning with forces in the labor union leadership and with the Democratic Party. The Workers' World Party focused on, they went through a lot of leaps and evolutions, but by the 80s, they focused on staging rallies in Washington, D.C., right? So that's slightly more radical. The Communist Party is doing election campaigns. They're staging protests. That's slightly more radical. And so that's my heritage. I come out of one of the groups that's like a slightly more radical knockoff of the Communist Party USA, and openly strove to be so. In their literature, they really, that was their viewpoint. Now, I'm not a member of that group anymore, and I don't agree with them on a number of questions. I don't represent them, and whatever. I've evolved a lot since my departure from that. But yeah, that's what I was in. For 8 years, I was a young person who was very active with the Workers' World Party, which was, one of these knockoff communist parties. And you had those in most countries. You would have a communist party, and then you'd have a kind of wannabe communist party that was slightly more radical because they needed people to join them for some reason. So that's what I was in. I think that's interesting, and I hope that's helpful to people, right? That in most countries you have that. So, that's the world communist movement. But the point that I wanted to make about the world communist movement is this. Here's the point I want to make. Are you ready? When Fidel Castro carried out the Cuban Revolution of 1959, he was not in the Communist Party. He was not in the Trotskyist Party. There were no Maoist parties at that point. He wasn't in the Socialist Party. Fidel Castro was his own thing. His brother was in the Communist Party. Raul Castro was in the Communist Party, but Raul Castro lied and didn't tell the Communist Party he was going to participate in an uprising with his brother. The Cuban Revolution was not made by any of these groups. They eventually joined it, but Fidel Castro wasn't part of it. Originally, Mao was not in the Communist Party. Mao had this group called the New People's Study Group. They followed Peter Kropotkin's anarchism. They were into Chinese history and the Taiping Uprising and such. It was only because of the Soviet Union and the formation that eventually Mao merged into the Communist Party. But Mao was not originally a Marxist, right? Ba'athist Arab socialism was not one of these groups. It was a split, right? It was Arabs who felt like the alliance between the Soviet Union and the imperialist countries was bad, right? When World War II was on the brink of breaking out, the Communist Party of Syria was telling Syrians not to resist French colonialism. So Michel Aflaq formed Ba'athist Arab socialism, and that was for people who believed in socialism but did believe in resisting the French colonialists, and it was kind of a socialism with Arab characteristics. And my point is this. Bolivarianism, Hugo Chavez, was never a member of the Venezuelan Communist Party. Bolivarianism was an independent movement. It said originally that it was for neither capitalism or socialism. It was for the third way. Eventually, it became a socialist movement. That we need to get out of the religious view of our politics. Whenever any new socialist party starts in the United States, everyone wants to know who they split from. Right? It's like religion, right? New churches don't just form. Right? Every church is a split from another church. And that split from another church. And that split from another church. And it all gets back to the Roman Catholic Church. And the Orthodox Church split from the Roman Catholic Church. And it's this viewpoint. In leftist circles, every group has to have a family tree. It's bizarre. If a socialist party is formed, it has to be from the Second International, the Third International, from Trotskyism, and it's like you can't just be a socialist. You can't. You have to be a split from 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 a split. Where do you fit on this big family tree, right? So when the Third Internet, you can't just be a socialist. This doesn't happen on the right. People on the right, they just start right-wing parties. And people look at those right-wing parties and join them, right? But on the left, you can't do that. Everyone's got to be, and every socialist group wants to sit there and explain to you why if Karl Marx was still alive, he would be in their group. They are the true inheritors of the First International. If Trotsky, we are the true inheritors. And, of course, if you're going to maintain that you are the one true party and everyone else is a fake Marxist, you've got to have absolutely clear positions on everything. And when I was active, I noticed this, right? In these groups, they don't expect you to agree with the basic views of the group. Oh, no. If your group says that in 1980, Enver Hoxha was wrong about implementing a certain socialist policy in Albania, you have to believe, you as a member of the group must go around believing that in 1968 in Albania, Enver Hoxha was wrong in implementing that policy. They want you to agree with absolutely everything on a very, very complex belief system. You are expected to have absolute total agreement with very, very, very complex stuff. You have to sit there in the 20th century, you have to agree. And again, the response is, well, you're allowed to disagree, but you're not allowed to tell anyone. If you go around, if someone says to you, hey, Caleb, I was wondering about Albania in 1980, was that policy right? You have to go, yes, that policy was right, even if you don't think it was right. Because if you say something that is not the party line, which is ultra specific, if you do that, then you're breaking discipline. You're violating democratic centralism. This is silliness. This doesn't happen on the right. I'm telling you, it doesn't happen on the right. Nobody on the right, when the right wing forms a new party, they don't sit there and go over the exact history of the 20th century and make you agree about absolutely everything, every little tiny detail. They don't do that. They just form a new right-wing party. It believes in some right-wing stuff. People join it. They agree with some of it. They agree with all of it. They carry it out. They build it. That's it. But on the left, leftism is not about carrying out a program. It's about implementing, it's like some kind of religion. And that's what needs to be gotten over. We need socialism in the United States. We need anti-imperialism in the United States. We need Marxism in the United States, sure. But we need it to function in a healthier and less cultish manner. We need it to not be the true church of Marxism. We need it to be socialism. We need it to be an alternative to capitalism. That's one thing, that's my argument. So I hope that was of interest to people. I'm still going here. We're still going strong. It's been 2 hours and we're still going strong. What else is on people's minds? I saw in the question section, there was one question that came through. Very true, Caleb, says Ramiro. Thank you, Ramiro. I appreciate it. Yeah. I mean, we need a socialism that doesn't fit these categories. Did you know Jason Unruhe endorsed your video of To Kill a Mockingbird? I did that. I did notice that. I don't think he really got it. Fred Siberian says we need it to be anti-capitalism. Exactly. We need just socialism. We don't need the minutia. We don't need, will you run for president? At this time, I have no political aspirations. But yeah, Jason Unruhe, I didn't mock To Kill a Mockingbird, but I criticized it because I felt that the book kind of represented, it was supposed to be about the 1930s. You can watch the clip. It was supposed to be about the 1930s, but it was representing kind of the ideology of the civil rights movement, and it kind of glossed over the best thing about the 1930s, which was anti-racist solidarity among low-income whites and low-income people of color. And he liked it. Yes, Jason liked it, and very good. I see Terry Strange is with us. She's got a YouTube channel. Well, great. Glad you're with us, Terry. What do you think of Christians being persecuted under communism? It's wrong. That's what I think of it. I think it's wrong. Absolutely wrong. I think that one of the biggest mistakes, what would a 21st century popular front look like? Okay, writing that down. Thank you for the super chat, Arthur. But what do I think about the persecution of Christians? It was wrong. It was wrong. I'm a Christian. And that was one of the biggest mistakes. And I'll tell you why it happened. It happened because, Marx did most of his writing at a time that the world was coming out of feudalism. The 1848 revolution in Germany, which Marx participated in, it was an uprising against feudalism, and it failed. And feudalism was all over Europe. And in feudalism, you had a state religion, and the state was the enforcer of religion. And because of that, the revolutions to bring down feudalism were very anti-religious. And that applies to our revolution in the United States, mind you. Thomas Jefferson was not a Christian. Thomas Paine, the author of what is it? The Common Sense, the pamphleteer of the Revolution. He was not a Christian either, and that the bourgeoisie, in order to create capitalism, was very anti-religious in a lot of cases. With the French Revolution, immediately afterwards, they outlawed religion. They called it, they converted all the churches to being temples of reason, and in feudalism, religion was a vehicle that justified the feudal system. It was not by choice. In fact, in England, it was a crime not to go to church, right? In England, it got a little weird because the most radical bourgeois revolutionaries were the Roundheads and the Puritans, who thought they weren't religious enough, and that's complicated. But regardless, coming out of feudalism, anti-clericalism made sense, and thinking scientifically was revolutionary. And I believe in science, and faith and science walk hand in hand for me. But at the time, the Catholic Church had suppressed science, had argued that the earth was actually the center of the universe, had, executed and tortured people for doing scientific research. Religion was associated with being anti-scientific, and revolution was associated with being anti-religious. So it made sense that the Marxist movement was anti-religious because it saw religion as an institution that upheld the old system of feudalism, and that was that, right? And in the countries that have had socialist revolutions, countries like China, countries like Russia, these countries were still in semi-feudal conditions. So the church was an institution that propped up the feudal regime, right? And the anti-religious stuff wasn't just communists, right? Dr. Sun Yat-sen, was the founder of modern China. He wasn't a communist, right? His wife, after he died, joined the Communist Party, but he was the founder of the Republic of China in the 1911 revolution. His first revolutionary act was smashing a temple in China. He went to a temple and he bashed all the statues, and he shouted at the peasants they shouldn't bow before these statues, that this was superstition and humiliation, and he was very anti-religious, right? And anti-religion, because under feudalism, religion plays the role of being the institution that props up feudal institutions and controls people and gives justification for feudal monarchies. Because of that, Marxism was very anti-religious because it saw the role of religion in feudalism. However, I argue that now that we are far away from feudalism, that religion is very different. Religion is a matter of personal choice, right? I'm a Christian because I chose to be. I went to church when I was growing up, but that's my Christianity is very different than the Christianity I grew up with, right? And that now, especially in the West, religion is very much a matter of personal choice and opinion, and it's complicated, right? And I think that the anti-religious stuff was because the state was becoming the new ruling institution, and the churches had been associated with the old ruling institutions. It's that simple. And so as they're becoming the new institution, they persecute the old institution. And it was a mistake, and it was wrong, and China has said many times that they committed huge mistakes, especially during the Cultural Revolution. But now, socialism is coming into the world differently. Hugo Chavez was Roman Catholic, right? Ba'athist Arab socialism is Islamic, right? In Iran, they call their system not capitalism, but Islam, right? And there's a lot of, socialism coming into the world now that is religious, that is not just tolerating religion, but is actually religious. So, I think that was a mistake. And that, that comes out of kind of, totalitarian, right? We've learned that you need a market sector in a socialist country. People should be able to start their own businesses. We've also learned that people, you can't completely force everyone to be an absolute Marxist. It's kind of like what I said about the Marxist parties, right? You cannot demand that everyone agree with you about absolutely everything about Albania in see the super chat, about Albania in 1980, right? Well, in the Soviet Union, they tried that. You cannot demand ideological totalism from people. You just can't do it. I mean, right? People have to be able to go their own way. They have to go their own way. And people have to be able to be religious if they want to be religious, right? I mean, you can't, if people want to practice their religion, they have to be able to do it. And that's that. And we've learned. So, that's all there is to it. I guess there's not much more to say. I mean, some of the stuff that is used against socialist countries is exaggerated, but some of it's true. One of the saddest things during the Cultural Revolution in China was that all over China, the young Red Guards went and destroyed ancient temples, ancient Buddhist temples, ancient temples from China's history. And they smashed them and they destroyed them. Years ago, when I was confused, I would defend that. I'd say, oh, those were the symbols of the old feudal way, and that was being revolutionary. I was wrong. I thought, no. I mean, that's people's history. That's people's way of life. Even if people didn't believe it anymore, you shouldn't destroy beautiful temples and ancient, the Parthenons in ancient Greece is still around. We don't worship Zeus. That was an awful thing that Mao did when he mobilized the Red Guards to smash those ancient temples. He shouldn't have done that. That was wrong. So now I have 2 super chats I must address. Super chat number 1. What would a 21st century popular front look like? I don't know. We're not there yet, Arthur. The thing is, the Popular Front was formed when fascism was being actively mobilized, when Hitler was in power in Germany, and there was a section of the ruling class that was trying to overthrow Roosevelt and establish a fascist regime in the United States. Right? 1935, you had the World Comintern, Communist International Congress, where communists were oriented toward building the Popular Front, anti-fascist alliances, different in every country, but there was one wing of the bourgeoisie that wanted fascist regimes, and there was another wing of the bourgeoisie that believed in democracy. And, that was the division. It was very clear, right? In Britain, Oswald Mosley and the British royal family wanted fascism, and the majority of the British ruling class did not, and, the British Communist Party aligned with, the ones who didn't want it, right? In the United States, Roosevelt wanted democracy, Henry Morgan and Henry Ford wanted fascism, and it was pretty clear, right? In the USA right now, it's not that simple, right? We're not on the brink of fascism. And one of the problems that I think, and I have criticized this before, but people are always trying to create the idea that we're on the brink of fascism and that we need to form a popular front with the Democrats. And, the Republicans are awful. Trump, he's on the brink. The reckless, awful, anti-immigrant. I am not a Trump supporter at all, but it's not that simple, right? It's not that simple, right? In the United States, the alliances and divisions of the ruling class are not that simple. And, as much as there are open racists marching around being racists, that's, again, we're in a period of crisis, demagogy, and all of that. We're not on the brink of having a military dictatorship. We're not. The United States we're not on the brink of having one section of the ruling class violently seize power and carry out mass murder and exterminations. Right? Bad things are happening, and if things escalate to the point that there is that level of open warfare between sections of the ruling class, at that point, obviously, Marxists would align with the section that doesn't want to kill us, and that would be that. But things in the United States aren't dividing that clearly at this point. I think there's a lot more confusion and division. Even within Trump's camp, there's a lot of confusion. A lot of Trump's supporters were furious that he killed Qasem Soleimani. A lot of them were happy about it. Right? Within the Democratic camp, the Hillary Clinton wing and the Bernie Sanders wing are completely different. The Andrew Yang wing is completely different than the other two. There are so many different factions and divisions. We don't have 2 solid camps within the ruling class right now. When it's pretty clear that one section of the ruling class has reached an alliance and it's marching to seize power very violently, and the rest of the ruling class is actively resisting that, that's a different situation, and that would be the situation where the Popular Front would happen. And that's, in the United States, there was an attempted military coup against Roosevelt, and it was happening, right? The business plot, it was exposed by U.S. military general, Marine Corps General Smedley Butler exposed it, right? And that Henry Morgan and Henry Ford and the leaders of the American Legion asked for a military coup to set up a military dictatorship. And that was for real. There was active plotting of implementing fascism in the United States, and it didn't work because, and in order to prevent it from working, Roosevelt had to become a social, not a social democrat, I guess, or, a populist or a very far left leader, a Bonapartist, basically. He had to become a left Bonapartist in order to hold it off. There was a clear, very, very solid division but in the ruling class. Like, you knew who was on what side. Rockefellers were with Roosevelt. Morgan was on the other side, right? Henry Ford was on the other side, right? It was a very clear, like it was like a line you could draw. You knew who in the ruling class was on what side. And it was almost like a civil war. I mean, fascism is civil war, basically. It's the ruling class, violently suppressing other members of the ruling class in response to a crisis. I mean, a great example of fascism would be in Peru, right? You had the Sendero Luminoso, the Maoist stuff in the countryside. So in response to that, you had Fujimori, the president, declare himself the dictator and exterminate other members of his own class and start implementing austerity at the barrel of a gun and creating a military regime, right? And that was Fujimori's wing of the ruling class of Peru, the military of Peru, seizing power, exterminating other rival factions, and implementing their will, right? And that's what happened in France in 1851. That's what happened in Nazi Germany. And I think that, Trump might want to do something like that, but he doesn't have the ability to do it. And that one thing about the U.S. ruling class is it's so divided at this point. I mean, I talk about two different wings, managerial versus, managerial versus entrepreneurial. But among those entrepreneurial folks, there are huge divisions. And those managerial folks don't want fascism because that's the last thing they want. The managerial bourgeoisie want absolute social peace. That's what Andrew Yang's book is all about. He wants absolute total social peace. That's what universal basic income is about. All these people are outcast and starving. They don't have a place in the means of production. They're going to rise up and revolt. They're going to vote for people like Trump. They're going to vote for people like Bernie Sanders. They're going to be out in the streets causing problems. They're going to be demanding things. So we need to just give them money and shut them up. That's basically what he's writing. That's basically the view of the managerial bourgeoisie. And they won't want fascism because fascism is very violent and dramatic and it would escalate everything. They don't want that. They want a gradual social control, right? So it's complicated. Their view is closer to Hitler's view because of the useless eaters thing and depopulation and trying to reboot the economy with destruction. They have Shaktian views. They do, right? And the depopulation and all of that. So there's an aspect of fascism in them, but they're not fascism, the Bonapartist fascism, when you have a violent seizure of power by one wing of the ruling class, that's not what they want. It's very interesting to think about. So the other question I was asked is there an economic catastrophe approaching? Yes. I mean, we're in the middle of it. It's already here, right? This is supposed to be a huge booming economy. Look at the results. People are hungry. Yes, we're already in it. And this artificial, when Trump got elected, again, representing that entrepreneurial section of the bourgeoisie, he turned the spigots on. He turned on the faucet, legalized all kinds of deep sea drilling on public lands, lowered the taxes on all the rich people. He did all this stuff that created like artificial growth, but incomes didn't increase. And he just, he lifted a lot of the regulations on lending, and he did a lot of stuff. The Obama administration had restricted a lot of the lower levels of capital in order to try and have damage control. And Trump got in there and he did the opposite. And it created not real economic growth, but expansion on Wall Street for 1 or 2 years. And that's slowing down. Job growth isn't what it once was. Wages are not rising. If you look at the stock market, if the stock market is doing well, but your life is not improving, you don't have real economic growth. In the 1950s in the United States, we had real economic growth. I'm not endorsing it was based on half the world being blown up by the Second World War and a lot of things, but in the 1950s in the United States, we had real economic growth. Wall Street was through the roof, right? Wall Street was making huge profits, but average people were also seeing a huge expansion of their life expectancy and living conditions, right? The house and the car and the white picket fence and, right? That was real economic growth. The 60s, there was real economic growth. About the 1970s, we stopped having real economic growth. In the 90s, we had a little bit of economic growth with the dot-com thing, but it didn't last very long. And it was, I mean, still, standard of living was going down, right? Real economic growth is like a rising tide lifting all boats. Everyone starts doing better. That's real growth, right? You get new roads being paved. You get average living conditions going up. You get everything increasing. That's real economic growth. We haven't really had that in the United States since the 50s and the 60s, right? The biggest episode of economic growth in all of world history was the post-World War II economic boom, or the post-World War II economic expansion, right? After the Second World War, they had huge episodes of economic growth all over the world. In Western Europe, huge economic growth. In the United States, even bigger economic growth. Soviet Union, huge economic growth. In African countries, you had huge economic growth. In the Middle East, you had huge economic growth. In China, in Asia. The post-World War II economic expansion was the biggest episode of economic growth in all of human history. Never has there been that much economic growth, ever. And none of it was done by libertarianism or free market policies. That's the craziest thing, right? The socialist countries were expanding, right? The Soviet Union rebuilt itself even stronger than it had been before the war as a world superpower with central planning. Egypt electrified the whole country with Arab socialism, and the Soviet Union building power plants and Abdel Nasser. Western Europe, was expanding economically with social democracy. That was the heyday of the labor parties and the social democratic welfare state. In the United States at that point, we had a very highly regulated economy, huge labor union membership, and huge taxes on rich people. It was the biggest and longest period of economic growth in all of human history. And it was not a free market thing. So I don't know how anyone can buy into this malarkey that these libertarians push, because libertarianism does not create this. But anyway, that was kind of a tangent. What else is on people's minds? I'm having a great time. We're going here. We're going. So, what else is on people's minds? I might chat with Jason sometime. People know Jason and I don't agree on a lot. His approach is very different than mine, but I might do another chat with him, sure. Why not, right? Socialist Bulgaria, I don't have that much to say about it. I talked about it on another live. I've talked about the Cultural Revolution before. I did a whole class. If you want to know about the Cultural Revolution, you should watch my video, Mao and American Socialists, the presentation I gave last month in New York City. Big hit. Standing room only. Wasn't enough chairs. My friend from Philly, Michael, he had to stand at one point. Shout out to you, Michael. Thanks for being a good sport and standing. We didn't have enough chairs in the room. I think there were at least 33 people there. It was great, and it's gotten lots of views on the internet. And I talked about Mao's influence on Americans. And I talked about, the Communist Party USA and William Z. Foster. I talked about Anna Louise Strong. I talked about the Black Panthers. I talked about the Cultural Revolution. You should watch it. I talk about the Cultural Revolution a lot. If you want to know about the Cultural Revolution, watch my Mao and American Socialist presentation. I get into it in great depth, and I talk about it. Very important stuff. What else is on people's minds? Oh, thank you, Terry. I'm glad you think I'm doing great videos. And the Black Panthers were a great group. Let me emphasize, though, that the adventurist faction, right, that Eldridge Cleaver had this group that carried out all this adventurist violence, but there was a split. And the Huey Newton faction that believed in working in communities and doing a free breakfast program. That was great. That was great stuff. But yeah, my voice is giving out here, folks. So I'm going to keep going for a little while longer because I love you all. And the longer we're here, the better we do. But I'm not going to last too much longer. So what else is on people's minds? What else is new, folks? We're going. We're having a great time. It's a great, lovely evening here, right? New York City, feels like summer outside, even though it's the middle of winter. Crazy times, crazy times. If you haven't gotten a copy yet, I've seen a lot of people in the comments have talked about it. City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. It is my book, and I hope you get a copy. I've gotten great reviews. It continues to sell. There is another book in the works, which I'll tell you all about at some point. I don't want to say too much about it, but it'll be out. I'll give it a year or so. It'll be out. But this is what I got here: articles and essays on socialism, city builders and vandals in our age. Big hit. Some great things are in the works. Again, can't say too much about it. Other than electoral politics, what other path do you suggest to get beyond capitalism? My personal view is that we have an ideological problem. Is people don't know about socialism. In the United States, socialist and leftist ideas are absent from the discourse. And I, as someone who's a journalist, as someone who's a writer, a speaker, have made it my mission to try and popularize these ideas and get them out there as widely as possible and get this message out there. I talk about a government of action. I talk about Marxism and the history of Marxism. I've written books and all of that. And that's what needs to be done. There is an ideological problem that people in the United States, look, at the time of the financial crisis of 2008, people who I never thought would think the government was lying, would think that there's a problem in the country, woke up and told me there was, and they told me the answer was real capitalism. Oh, we just need to have real capitalism. I couldn't believe it. Well, why would they think that? Well, why would they be socialists? I mean, there's an ideological gap. These ideas are not out there, and we need to change that. And that's what I have been very dedicated to, giving classes, giving presentations, and I'm doing my best to try. There's some exciting things in the works. There's going to be a conference in April that I'm part of, and I'm helping put together. More details are coming, and I'm trying to counter that and ideologically change that. Put socialism and economic progress and growth into the discourse. Put the notion that we can have a rationally planned economy into the discourse. It needs to be there. It's missing from the discourse, and we need it. We need it more than ever. More than ever, we need these ideas to be out there, and they're largely missing. And when people do get them, often they get them in a way that is confused and mucked up with all this pessimism. And that's a problem. We need optimistic, constructive socialism, not ultra-left adventurous violence, not, passive, pessimistic, there is no hope, but an optimistic message that we can build a better future. If we, the people, come together and take control of the means of production, we can build a better world. We need a left that makes people feel strong, doesn't disempower people, doesn't shame people, doesn't tear people down, right? But a left that makes people feel strong, that empowers young people to go out and build a better future, right? So there you go. Rick Fry says, I just realized Caleb isn't in front of the bookshelf. Well, you're way behind, Rick, but that's okay. Every so often I do one here from this angle. It's just, how things go. Happens sometimes. But folks, I will end. I have often ended my lives by reciting this particular piece of writing. So I'm going to recite it once again. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And on that note, folks, I'm going to say good night. Best wishes.